welcome to the 2023 International Conference on Geospatial Information Science, what we call ICGIS. My name is Jason, and I am an Associate Research Fellow at Korea Research Institute for Human Settlements. On behalf of the Institute, I wish to extend our warm welcome and thank you to all participants, distinguished speakers, panels, and audience. The ICGIS started in 1996, and since then we have covered a wide range of current topics related to GIS. The top experts in the field invited by the ICGIS have given valuable presentations for the development of GIS in Korea. I am sure that through the ICGIS, we have found important areas for national GIS policies and increased academic exchanges. I would like to thank you once again for joining us today at the ICGIS. The theme of the ICGIS this year is Geosimulation for Better Life. It is related to digital twin in 7th National Information Master Plan. Today we will focus on the impact of geosimulation on our diverse fields of city and city life with interesting presentations. Let me give a brief outline for today's event. In a few minutes, we start with a keynote speech. After the short coffee break, we will have 5 presentations in the invited talk session. After the second coffee break, there will be discussion and Q&A sessions with all speakers and panels. So, without any further delay, I would like to invite the distinguished Professor Jean-Claude Thill to give his keynote speech. Today's title of his speech is GeoAI, the New Frontier in Health System Modeling. Dr. Jean-Claude Thill is a Knight Distinguished Professor at the University of North Carolina at Charlotte, USA, with an academic background in geography from the Catholic University of Leuven, Belgium. His scholarship centers on urban and regional systems, geospatial analytics, and spatial temporal modeling of events sensed in the form of large micro-level data. He is affiliated with the Department of Geography and Earth Sciences, the School of Data Science, and the program in public policy. He was elected Fellow of the American Association of Geographers and the Regional Science Association International. He is a frequent guest speaker on all continents and has extensively engaged in research internationally. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Professor Jean-Claude Thill.
All right, thank you very much for the invitation, and thank you very much for you, the audience here, to be present. This is my sort of second trip here in Korea and in Seoul in particular, and I'm really looking forward to interact with a number of you, and I think that I felt home really meeting back with a number of distinguished scholars here in Korea in the realm of GI science and geospatial analytics and related matters. So, when I decided really to, on the topic of my talk, I really wanted to make it at the same time really broad enough to connect to the overall theme of GeoAI, but also really talk about some of the research that I've done in this area over the past few years. And so hence the title of my presentation, GeoAI, the New Frontier in Health Systems Modeling. So very specifically, I'm going to talk about GeoAI in that domain of application, which is a domain in which I've been doing extensive research over the past few years, really tied particularly to, well, the lockdown and COVID, and really that there was really an opportunity for me to do work in this area, and that is really some of the material I'm going to share with you. And I'm going to try to stress really the significance of what GeoAI can contribute to this field, which is really very important for humanity and human well-being and livable cities and things alike. And that is certainly an element that has motivated me really to continue doing work in this area. The content of my talk is outlined on this slide, where I'm going to start with giving you a little bit more context about GeoAI, really what it comes from. Having been really involved in GI science and in GIS and spatial analysis and geoinformation systems for quite some time, really this is an evolution that I've lived through, and I will be able to provide you maybe with a little bit of context and put things in perspective in that respect. Then I will tell you a little bit about really what the state of research and knowledge is in health information systems, particularly in the context of infectious disease, which is really the one that will frame really my discussion. And then I will present 3 specific case studies, increasingly complex in a way that I've been involved in over the past few years, that will really show the benefit of really thinking along the GeoAI perspective as opposed to a much more traditional data processing or GIS perspective. And then I will wrap up with some conclusions on my own, given my own experience and really where I see the field going. So when we talk about GeoAI, so first of all, GeoAI is geospatial artificial intelligence. So there are 2 parts to it, and ultimately we are really bringing together those 2 parts really to leverage the benefit of both of them for the greater good of society, and answering some specific questions as well as some questions of academic interest. In the framework of geospatial studies, we've used really analytical approaches for quite some time, and specifically the GeoAI perspective will be to incorporate artificial intelligence. So certainly we aim to exploit the spatial dimension, make it spatially explicit, not implicit, but explicit, which is really what we share in the research that we do. On the other hand, there is the AI dimension, which can be defined in different ways by different people. I'll work with a number of data scientists, and really probably no 2 data scientists will agree on really the definition of AI or the distinction between AI and machine learning, and I'm certainly not going to go over that. Typically, really machine learning is conceived to be a subset of AI being broader in many respects, more fundamental. And AI typically is defined as an inquiry that enables computers to mimic human intelligence. So that is really very broad, because lots of things can certainly be labeled that way and can fall within that perimeter. So that really means using logic, if-then decision rules, decision trees, and you name it. I mean, that's definitely not an exhaustive list. That's much more broader than that. Machine learning is often seen as a part of AI, as I said. And again, I'm not going to try to define really the distinction there between the 2. So fundamentally, certainly, like I indicated earlier, I guess I have gray hair, so I've been around for quite some time, but I've seen an evolution of many of those terms and that terminology over the years, over the decades, as a matter of fact. I certainly have lived through, in a way, the birth of GIS, the development of GI science, the emergence really of geoinformatics, of GIS&T, so geographic information science and technology, or systems and technology. Much more traditional really would be, or conventional and preceding any of these technologies would be spatial analysis. Geocomputation is a term that is still used, and there's still an international conference that takes place that is called Geocomputation Conference. Today, at least in North America and the US, we often refer to geospatial analytics, and the analytics particularly makes the bridge with data science. So this is a catchy term that is really often used. Now today, and that's really the term that is really used for this conference, we talk about GeoAI. So what is the difference between all of those? I'm not necessarily the kind of person who likes to basically give a tight definition to things, and ultimately it doesn't matter all that much. Really what matters is whether you find some knowledge creation that is desirable really by espousing a different perspective. And certainly the change in terminology often is really to ride the wave of what is deemed to be desirable, particularly from the perspective of the administrators, who is they want to fund positions and fund programs and research programs and departments and the like. But certainly, as you will see, one thing that I do want to stress is that it's more than just a change in the name, I think. So what is new in GeoAI? So how can we say basically this is really something that is really different? Well, first of all, I tried to figure out really who would have coined the term GOI. I didn't find it. Maybe I didn't look far enough or long enough, but basically I didn't find it. And to me, that's not that important either. I think it is a field that is emerging, and I think certainly at many professional conferences, academic conferences, globally, we find indeed a concentration of papers and of sessions really that specifically use the term GOAI. So that in itself is a sign that indeed it does matter. Lots of positions that are being advertised, faculty positions and so on in a number of institutions, specifically hiring in the area of GOAI as opposed to more traditional GIS or GI science. So that in itself is really, conveys really there is an interest and really the perceived benefit of the perspective that is brought, unique perspective that is brought by GOAI. Certainly one thing that before really adopting a name and making it my own and using it on a regular basis, I like to know, well, does it really matter? Or is it just a question of old wine in a new bottle? So old wine really meaning, well, there's really nothing fundamentally, the content is the same, but we change the packaging, a marketing issue basically. And like I indicated over the past couple minutes, certainly spatial analysis has been around for quite some time and can be extremely computationally intensive. That's one of the pillars of GI science, ultimately. It's been recognized for some time now. Certainly as well, spatial analysis has used through its multiple reincarnation a lot of, and many of the themes of GI science, really those dealing with accuracy, and you will hear some of that later today, multi-scale analysis, spatial cognition, ontology, and so on, have used many of the concepts that are fundamental to not just machine learning, so the processing at the very end, but fundamentally rethinking really the role of the humans and the machines, so much more fundamentally artificial intelligence driven and focused. And that goes back to the 1980s, so this is not really new. So what is fundamental? What is new about GOAI ultimately, right? So in my mind, GOAI is different from others, more than just in the detail. It's more than just really a new bottle around the old wine. So it is more than that. It's more than just basically accelerating the ability to process things. And really, I'm maybe going to jump directly to the very bottom there of the slide by saying that in my mind, GOAI is more than incremental. So it's more than just an incremental transformation of what GI scientists have been doing. But this is really transformational. That's a term that we use often in the US, in the sense that it enables us to do science that really was not possible before. Better science, but science that was even not possible before. In the same way, and really this is not a terminology or phrase that I've used, in the same way as the microscope in science, in biology and so on, all right, has made possible really to scope at a much finer resolution down below the human cell level. So that's really what has been enabled. So GI science really, the analogy between GI science and really the microscope really was used decades ago by my good child in that respect. And I would argue that so GOAI really is doing the same thing at this stage, right? So there's more than just the processing at the very end of the analytics. It can really be very fundamental. And that's really what I'm trying to advocate for you. This is a very different way of thinking about problems and how we can incorporate the data at solving some problems that have a geospatial dimension. So GOAI presents a number of challenges that we all know about. It's about the data volume. It's really about data that is not normal. And that is really something that I've warmed up over the years, over the decades that I've really done analytics from the geospatial perspective. Many of the statistics that I taught or that you learned, that we all learned ultimately, is fundamentally predicated on the assumption of normality. So who has ever said that the world is normal? The world is not normal, right? Many of the big data that we use have a long tail. That in itself really puts out of range really many of the traditional statistics. Just remember that. Many of the traditional statistics really are predicated on the assumption of normality of your data, period. And if you don't really follow those fundamental properties of statistics, which is very constraining, really for the sake of developing theories in the 1960s, 70s, and 80s, then really you're not doing good work because you're skipping a major assumption and your results are going to be fundamentally flawed, okay? I like to remind students about that, really, because that's really very important. So it's not because the methods are there that you really should use them. You need to make sure that you use the right methodologies for your problems. Now, this really would be just a sort of a methods approach, but fundamentally we have many other differences. Another element that often we learn about really when we learn about modeling is we learn about regression. Well, regression fundamentally is linear. Many of the statistical techniques make assumptions on linearity, right? Who has ever said the world is linear? We all know, for those of us who have done research for some time, that the world is not linear. Lots of nonlinearities, lots of feedback loops and so on, right? That's the reality of the world. So in many ways, GeoAI allows you to stay closer or get back to what the data is about or what the world is about, which is that complexity that exists in the world. So that's really the fundamental perspective that I wound up basically to in my own research that I want to communicate to all of you. That's really very important. It's more than just processing more data. It's more than that, much more than that. It's a very different perspective. Data uncertainty is really very important. I was talking to one of the speakers earlier today really about data uncertainty, which often we take for granted. And I talked to a lot of data scientists, and unfortunately they tend to forget about that. That data tends to be very dirty. They forget about the uncertainty, right? So we should be much more cognizant of this, and hopefully we as GAI scientists really will be able to reconnect and really make our work relevant from that particular perspective. That's important. GeoAI can help in that way. The data variety, structured data, things that are coded numeric versus things that are not easily codable. Text information. We all know about ChatGPT and about large language models, right? That have become very popular these days. But really, how can you integrate basically text information with numeric information? And that's really a frontier, but that's really a frontier where we can participate very actively. And again, part of the discussion I had earlier today is really some of the work that I've done over the years really is really to look at space that's not just a geographic space, but the space of attributes, space of concepts, and really the space being a measure of proximity and similarity of the ideas that we have, the concepts that we have, and we can embed all of that in space. Well, guess what? This is exactly what ChatGPT is doing, right? So we as GIS researchers, as contributors to GeoAI, really should not feel that we are kept out of the loop. On the contrary, we should feel at home really in this new world of large language models. This is really a place where we have something to contribute, and we should feel that stay close basically to the latest developments. So data variety is important. There's no reason to limit ourselves just to what is numerically mappable on the map, but really we can communicate in a spatial way really on those digital and visual means, which are the maps. That is really something very central to what we should be doing. We certainly can do a lot of data generation and use multi-scalar types of analyses at different scales, from the fairly coarsely aggregated and downscaling the data all the way to the individual level according to some rules that make sense given the context of the analysis. The last point where I really see some significant challenges but also contribution that we can make is in the area of really bridging the gap between exploratory confirmatory analysis. And I like to say that really because I still do react a lot to people who basically say that machine learning or black box or neural networks, that neural networks are black boxes. I don't like that idea because that's an idea was basically promoted in the 1970s by people who basically didn't really want to learn about it. And I think we can learn about it. We can see what's in the box now. So it is not a black box anymore. And certainly we can make sense of what's going on. And as we move away from artificial neural nets to deep learning types of approaches, like one of those that I'm going to talk about today, we can make sense of what's going on. It's a question of understanding the mathematics behind it. So we can also really use the GeoAI techniques and the results of it, not just to explore relationships, but really to generate, using the exploration of these questions to test hypotheses, to generate new theories. And I think that that's fundamental. That's really about science. This is really following and circling back to what we learned about in terms of the scientific approach. This is not just disconnected and a second-rate type of contribution to knowledge. All right, so as you can tell, I'm pretty excited really about GeoAI in terms of what it can contribute a lot, and in a way that brings us a little bit closer maybe to computer science and data science, which is really a good thing, but really teaching them as well what the geo component really can do for our collective understanding of what the world is about and behaviors of individuals, but also agents at different levels of granularity is about. So a couple of slides, I believe, on health information or health systems modeling. And specifically here, I'm really talking about systems modeling within that has a geospatial dimension. So I'm really talking about infectious disease particularly. So certainly these systems have been studied for decades. And I'm certainly not going to say that really the work was not good, but certainly there has been a very slow evolution in terms of the development of the thing of how to best, for instance, predict an outbreak, right? And really still today, a lot of the models that are being used are very traditional. I mean, they were developed decades ago. There has not fundamentally been a revolution in that respect in terms of the thinking and leveraging really the new ways really of capturing those new dimensions. So infectious disease, of course, we're just coming out of really COVID-19, but certainly there have been a number of others, so this is not new. Certainly we have all been marked really by COVID-19, and for a number of us on the research community, this has been an opportunity, including in the GeoAI sphere, really to tap into these opportunities, and that definitely has been my case. Infectious disease are fundamentally geospatial in the sense that you basically acquire a virus from someone else, right? You don't develop it on your own. So if you isolate yourself completely, you live in a bubble, basically, you are not going to get the disease, which is really that whole thing really about social distancing and so on that we all lived with in different degrees in different parts of the world. But the temporality, the temporal dynamics is really very important. And the word time is really very important here because this is not just a snapshot at one time, but really you look at the situation today with respect to what it was yesterday and the day before and the day before. So it's really looking at a sequence of events and how all of that really comes together to explain really the evolution really of the state and the health of the individuals as part of the system in that context. The incorporation of all of those elements is really very difficult to predict, particularly if you do not just want to, in hindsight or retrospectively, understand the dynamics of a disease, but really you want to be able to predict it and manage the evolution of it and potentially adjust the policies, the health policies, the interventions as it unfolds. So increasingly it is really necessary to develop tools that are not just slow and for which you need to wait basically a week to get results out of the computers on your desktop. So you need to be able to get some very fast results, right? So that you can communicate really the recommendations to the health officials to be able to plan for it. But you also need to be able to anticipate really in what are the conditions that most conducive to the development of a pandemic in the first place. And that's really a place really where we can collectively play a very important role. And I know that really this is not everybody's cup of tea to do research in that area, but this is definitely an area that is really very important because it affects human beings in all countries, in all colors and all race, whether they live in the cities or rural areas. And really the spatial and temporal dimension is really very important. So we experience here one of the greatest complexities really of many of the research problems that we can conceive of, particularly because we have the environment, physical environment, we have the social environment, and then we have really human beings, including really what's going on in their brain. Their willingness to adapt things and to comply with the rules and regulations. And having been in the US during COVID-19, I certainly experienced a lot of the pushback from a large part of the population to vaccination. Now, a lot of those people right now are a few feet under because really didn't want to be vaccinated. They didn't quite survive long enough really to be able to tell their own story, right? That's the situation. So, but understanding really the process that led them to believe this is really something we can capture using GeoAI, right? And that's really something that I'm going to talk about later on today. So prediction of the dynamics of infectious disease is wicked. And the term wicked is a term that is used sometimes in academics. So it is really a term that has a meaning, so it's extremely complex. That's really what it means. Define an easy solution, an easy understanding, easy modeling, and so on. It's extremely complex with a lot of nonlinearity, feedback loops, and really pushbacks from individuals and from organizations at every corner, okay? So this is really very important. And again, this is not just about COVID-19. Some of the research I'm going to present is about COVID-19, but not all of it, right? So this is much broader than that. And let's face it, some of you are from countries that experienced infectious disease before COVID in a big way. The US did not, which is probably the reason why we were very slow to react. There are many other reasons as well, including political. But certainly, it is most likely, I'm ready to bet, and I'm not a gambler, that there will be another one around the corner. Whether it is next month, next year, or in 5 years' time, but there will be another major pandemic that's going to hit us. So we need to be prepared, and I think we can develop the tools to put us in a better position for this. All right, so traditionally, in this body of literature, you can really, if you look at the literature, and from a modeling perspective, you will see that really there are three broad groups of spatial temporal bodies of literature, traditions, basically. So one of them is the one that I refer to as ecological modeling. It's really looking at groups of individuals. So it's not modeling the choices made by individuals and the infection of each individual, but it's really looking at it from an ecological perspective. And these are the those mainly look at, they use fundamentally spatial econometric types of techniques. And I have here in my sort of previous life, even though this is really not that long ago, just a few years ago, I did some work with some Chinese colleagues, and we're looking at modeling rabies in China. So really in reaction to the environment, basically, and human environment, the social environment, and so on. So we used a spatial econometric type of framework, which was really very complex, but very intricate really to deal with, and has limitations as well. And really what I'm arguing is that was not GeoAI. This is very traditional in a way, even though this was a cutting edge model, but cutting edge in a different perspective, right? Still very much econometric, spatial econometric. So that's an example of that. The next one, as you see, those are the mechanistic models, compartmentalization types of models that basically look at things much more at the individual level. And those are SEIR models, so referring to susceptible, E meaning exposed, R being infected, and R being recovered. So the initials, basically, SEIR, which I'm going to use a few times later on in the presentation, really refers to those different states of agents in society. And the modeling, these models are fairly ancient in many ways, they're decades old, conceived really not by geospatial scientists at all, by epidemiologists. They're still used today. They're still very much the majority of those models. They've been effective in some respects, but really one of the things that has been very clear during the recent development with the COVID-19 pandemic is really those models do not perform extremely well. So they have limitations, and increasingly, but part of the reason is really that they have a number of rigidities, and they rely on really differential mathematics, so ordinary differential equations and things like that, which are not necessarily the best way really to deal with some of those problems, and not necessarily capable either of dealing with the idiosyncrasies of situations at a particular location. So discretizing the space is not something that is really very easy to do using these models. And so the number of parameters really can be, that can capture basically transition probabilities between different states of each individuals for a particular disease at a particular location, potentially. So it's estimated roughly 70% of all the COVID-19 predictive models were of that vein, pretty much in all countries, right? But certainly there has been an evolution, and during COVID, really, as research groups really were warming up basically to other techniques, and there was a blend, a lot of activity, at least from what I've seen in the US and definitely in other parts of the world as well, trying to blend really that more traditional approach with some of the others, particularly the one on the very bottom, so machine learning, okay? Machine learning is not necessarily geospatial, but certainly some of those approaches are geospatial, so we're really talking here about GeoAI. And certainly today and tomorrow, that's really the future. That's the frontier in terms of really the newest development and the ability to capture really the richness of the dynamics across space and through time of epidemics, infectious disease. All right, so let me talk really about, in a few minutes for each of those three studies. The first one is one that we did sort of still in line with, I guess, a more traditional approach and a CIR type of modeling approach, but incorporating some spatially explicit component. The SCI models are not spatial models, fundamentally. They were not developed as part of our community, and ultimately, there have been a number of add-ons over time that really try to enrich these models, particularly adding really the spatial elements. And some of the elements that we did take into account in the models that we developed were the fact that the exposure probabilities, which is the transition between the susceptibility and the exposed states, depend on really how close individuals are from each other, the communities are from each other, right? And that really be captured using spatial weight structures, which is really something that is dear to us in GI science and in GIS, but also accounting for the heterogeneity in space. So it's the spatial dependence, but also the heterogeneity. So if you have different populations living in different areas, they have different rates of mobility, different propensities, maybe susceptibilities because of their age, because of health conditions, preconditions that they have. So we can incorporate, and that's really what we did in this model. We did incorporate the variation that exists at different locations in that metropolitan area. So we fitted the data for the metro area of Charlotte, which is mapped there in the bottom of the slide. And it's a system with 10 counties, so different counties, a county being a portion basically of the entire metropolitan area. The very center of it being Mecklenburg County, for those of you who do know about Charlotte, and really name for some of the others. So we fit that with actual data in terms of the number of cases, but also the number of deaths at the county level on a daily basis that was smoothed to a weekly moving average between March 29, 2020 and March 13, 2021. And then we used some of that information to predict further down the road, several weeks further down, so from March 20th to April 10, 2020. So we really looked at this as a tool, not just to understand really the causes and the factors, but really to use it for prediction, okay? At the scale of the metropolitan area, given the structure of the metropolitan area, the spread basically of population, but also the heterogeneity of the population across that space. Goodness of fit was done using an IMSC goodness of fit measure. So we use a very traditional model in line with those compartment models. And these are some of the results I'm going to show. So here you have 10 plots. The dots represent the number of cases on top. These are all number of cases. Number of cases of infection of the population living in each of those 10 counties. So there are 10 little boxes really on a weekly basis from the left to the right along the timeline, okay? And then what really you see is you have a line that really is the result of the prediction that we had. and you have an interval of confidence around it. So that really shows really how well we were able to predict the number of cases that occurred in each of those communities, okay? The line that you see, the vertical line that you have on the right, is really how far the data that we use for the calibration of the model was. And then really 3 weeks forward, we try to predict really what the rates of infection would have been in the population based on the calibrated model that we had. And so the interesting thing that we did is really we wanted to figure out really how good our model that would incorporate that spatial content really would be compared to a baseline. And the baseline that we used here, so we had different models. So those are the models that are reported there in the table at the center. And really the columns are the different counties, the different spatial units that we have. So 10 different columns. And you have the IMSC that is reported for each of those entities based on our prediction. Really, and we compare this to an ensemble model. An ensemble model is sort of a hybrid, a composite of a number of models that were national models from the CDC, Center for Disease Control in the US. So we use that as a benchmark. Again, there was I don't remember, I think 10 different models that basically were used, pulled together. We used that as a benchmark. Those were the 10 best models out there, right? And if you look at the models, the performance of our model, you see that really the IMSC of our model that was really specifically geospatial, while the others were not, really is equally good, if not better, in most communities compared to that ensemble model. Now you say, well, okay, what have we accomplished if we're not better? Well, the advantage is really we run one model because the ensemble is the combination of 10 teams nationally who basically had done their own modeling. So that's the best combination of 10 models of hours and hours and hours of work that went into it, while our model was just one single model. So we did as well as they did by having one single model with the geospatial content, okay? And I'm not going to go over the remaining details on that slide. So incorporating the geospatial dimension is important. So this was still a very traditional model, but basically moving towards something that is more akin to GeoAI perspective, even though there was no machine learning in that particular model yet. Okay. The second study that we did was national. Here we use deep learning. Okay. So deep learning is not artificial neural nets. This is really a different kind of model that we used here, which is called the short long-term memory model at STM, which is really very good. It's one of the cutting-edge models, basically, that are used particularly effective at capturing really time series, right? So basically, how the state of a system, the state of values of a variable, of a system at one location, any location, depends on really what it was the time before and the time before and the time before. So you can build in memory, basically, in your model. That's really what that is, right? So this is definitely a machine learning technique that we used here. And we tried to fit a number of different models, similar, following essentially the pattern that we had in the first study, incorporating a lot of the socioeconomic variables at the county level. This is national, right? So we had roughly 3,200 observations, right? With the same kind of data, counts of infections, but also counts of deaths at the county level. And it turned out that really none of the socio-demographic characterization of the population living in those counties really was effective. So we dropped out of that, which is pretty amazing. We were shocked that really they were not making much of a difference. Okay, heterogeneity was not much of a factor. That's really what I mean to say here. But really one thing that we did was take into account the fact that we have here an infectious disease. And we know that really to be infected, how close you are from other communities would be very important, right? How much movement there is, how much social distancing take place. We're lucky enough to be able to rely on some data about mobility within each of those counties. So we incorporated that as the sole predictor, basically, of those models. So basically, we had 3 models that we calibrated, we estimated, we fit at the same time. One for cases, one for deaths, so infection cases, one for deaths, and then the other one for the mobility of the population, right? So that's really what we did. And again, this is calibrated on data fit on models at the county level. 3,100 counties, 3,129 counties over a 30-week period. And then we use, again, the calibrated model, the fitted model, to predict further down the road. Now, in terms of mobility, we use data from a company called SafeGraph in the US, which during COVID really made a lot of data available so that it was possible indeed for the research community to understand really how much contact there was between people and use some of that information for prediction purposes, okay? And we use really those three things really to estimate, to calibrate our model, to fit our model. And we use the usual out-of-sample validation approach, 70% for training, 30% for validation. And we use a time lag of 3 weeks as well. In other words, we use the reality of 3 weeks before the given incubation period really to predict the number of cases 3 weeks later, okay? And again, we use the IMSE for goodness of fit, and some of the other technical specs really of this model, if you really want to know really how it was structured in terms of number of nodes and so on. Again, LSTM, those are neural nets with a lot of hidden layers, hidden nodes. And really very quickly, these are some of the results that we obtained. Again, really the sociodemographic variables, environmental variables, really were not found to be significant, so we basically stuck with a much more, with a simpler model. But we did predict as well, really, since we had 3 parallel models that we fit at the same time. So it was eminently spatial temporal. And so the third one being the social contact and the mobility element that we predict based on the rate of infection and the rate of mortality. And at the bottom there you see a number of cases. Model number 1 is calibrated, is labeled. I don't know if I can, maybe I shouldn't use this. So basically the charts at the bottom, the one that is labeled model 1 did not use the social contacts and mobility. Model number 2 did. And really one thing that you will see on the vertical axis, you have the IMSE for a number of replication of our model for different sampling fractions, different proportion of our 3,200 observations, the counties that were available. And really one thing that you will see is really that model number 2 is always better. So using basically the mobility information that we had and really ability to predict it as well was really a very strong element to enhance the quality of our models. It's a very strong predictor, okay, extremely strong predictor. And one of the other things that you will see here, so these are the results in terms of prediction for 4 weeks looking forward, that it is much easier to predict 1 week down the road or 2 weeks down the road, but really predicting over the longer term, 3 and 4 weeks can be more hazardous. But definitely if you incorporate some of that mobility information, you're in a much better position than if you don't to not predict it. So a plain time series analysis really doesn't quite cut it, in other words. So introducing some of the predictors in terms of mobility enriches our ability to predict and anticipate really the state of the system. With some of the other results that we have, and here again we did compare with the CDC's ensemble modeling work, because I guess I don't have really that much time, I'm not going to say too much about this, but really on top really you have the our results. The second row are the results from the CDC ensemble modeling work, and really you see that really the results are very similar. So we are doing very good work through our models. And at the bottom, that's a model that we can compare to CDC. CDC basically tried to estimate through their ensemble modeling only the number of infection, not the number of deaths, while we were able to predict the number of deaths, which is really what you see in the very bottom down there. Now, the advantage of really disaggregating and using geospatial units is really that we could really see how good the model was to predict the number of cases, but also the number of deaths at the county level. And really what is reported on these two maps is on the left, the results of our own model at the county level, and the error basically that, that existed. And on the right, really the predictions from the CDC ensemble modeling. And interestingly, our model was pretty good in terms of overall performance, but really we did not perform too well in some counties, and you see in Southern California particularly, but really the CDC didn't do very well there either. So that's some structural similarities between really our inability basically to capture some of the idiosyncrasies in those counties, and maybe it's really because they're larger, whatever. But certainly we see some close similarity in both cases. All right, so again, this is definitely GeoAI in the sense that really we went that way. Now the third study is more intimately GeoAI, but really very different in many respects. It has some characters and some flavors of some of the things that really many of you probably learned about. This is a model that, again, about infectious disease, not COVID related though, really that uses a spatial agent-based model. So the agents here being individuals, but also other types of entities. And for this work, what we were particularly interested in exploring was the role of transportation, particularly shared biking systems in the spread of a disease. And why was that important? Well, we tried to figure out basically, as you touch the handlebars of a bike, if indeed you use someone else's bike that is just being rented by you and shared between you and someone else before and someone else afterwards, what if the person that really used the bike right before you was infected? What happens? It's not to scare you, but those things do happen, right? And especially in countries like in Asia, really, where indeed those systems are very common. So really, what is the risk for you to become infected as well? So this is not the case of COVID, because this is infection really by surface, the fomite, so by contact basically, not by particles in the air. So that's really very different. We try to figure out really what is the risk of propagation, expansion, and maybe of a disease that really would be created or generated or amplified by those shared mobility services, right? And given the fact that really micromobility services really are increasingly important in the world, this is a legitimate question. And we try to use this model, very complex as you will see in a minute, even though I'm just going to give you the overall structure, really in answering that specific question. Now, this is a simulation work. This is not based on actual data. We did not have actual data about infection in this case. We had actual data about the micromobility services and about the population, lots of actual data, but not about infection, right? So this is really an attempt really to anticipate really what is the risk before indeed there's a pandemic that would hit us with these kinds of characteristics. So transportation certainly is very instrumental in a lot of disease epidemic considerations. Transportation can help really spread the disease much faster at greater distance, but really what we were interested in is really the third point here, is really that the micromobility service would be a vector of the disease, which is really very different, right? And for that, really, that has never been studied. So really wanted to, the only way to study it basically is use a simulation model, right? So that's really the work that we did over here. And so the core model is an SEIR model, right, that we use in the simulation process, and that we articulated through a modeling framework that you will see on the next couple of slides as part of an agent-based model. All right, so this is the diagram that really shows the entire structure. On the right side, the right box there, you see the disease transmission that happens between individuals, but also between the bikes and individuals, which really means a transition from individual to individual through a vector, which is the bike, okay? We had, since this was a simulation model, a modeling of the population. So we use micro-simulation models to simulate a population, hundreds of thousands of individuals in Chicago. That was our case study. And we use actual bike sharing data as well from the bike sharing system of Chicago. So lots of work that was simulated, particularly to assign the household to specific locations, to specific schools, to specific places of work, really using some of the census statistics that exist out there. So that's fundamentally the structure that we used as part of that simulation work. And those are some of the technical specifications from a modeling perspective, the number of some of the data aspects of it. This is something that's, from a data perspective, extremely computationally expensive. And then we basically tested a few, trying to answer a few research questions. So for instance, can really the micromobility really trigger the emergence of a disease? And for that, essentially what we did is artificially, we basically create one infected individual at one location. We tried to see if that location uses a bike sharing system. So how likely it is that that's going to trigger an infection, right? An outbreak. So we iterated over 30 days and counted the number of instances over which this was going to be the case. And indeed, when you see the text there, really you have the elements, the visual elements that are consistent with this. So micromobility is capable of starting a pandemic, a viral event. It is possible to do it alone, single-handedly, even if it's not present anywhere else in society. We're able to control for that through the simulation work. So that's really the power of GeoAI. You can really develop scenarios this way, right? Another question was, if there's an outbreak, so how significant is the role of a bike sharing system going to be for the evolution of the outbreak, the spread, and amplify basically the spread of the pandemic? And they have, probably because really we worked on the case of Chicago. Chicago is a big city, but biking is not a big thing, really, not like in many Asian countries. And definitely we didn't really see much of an effect. So it is true that the number of infected individuals is large, but really if you look at the vertical scale, these are individuals, people infected. It's actually very small. So it is really not a major effect on the expansion of an existing outbreak at some point, right? So through the simulation, we were able to test a number of those hypotheses and those questions, right? And then because it is really geospatial and we assign each individual to a location on some rules of thumb that we had developed. So the map that you see here are maps of Chicago. On the right side, on the east side, there you have the lake. So you have Chicago on the left. And really what is being simulated over here is the risk of exposure to a viral disease that we simulated in a micromobility environment. And really one thing that you see is that the shading of the different units, which are neighborhoods around each of the biking stations, okay? Those are docking stations. That's a docked bike sharing system here. It's very uneven. The risk is very high really in the city center, is much lower in the suburbs really because those stations are further apart and the rate of biking is definitely much more limited as well. But definitely there's a very significant unevenness of the risk of exposure really in the geographic space. And the map that is on the right is a study of hotspots and cold spots. And really see there is a big hotspot really in red or light red there. That really shows that. So that's the city center of Chicago, right? And to the north as well towards the university. All right, so this is the last of the 3 studies. So I'm wrapping up just with one slide here to basically tell you really what I wanted to communicate to you. GeoAI has a lot of potential. GeoAI really has potential is beyond what a normal GIS will be, okay? Way beyond that, because it allows you really to be much more disaggregated, but also to integrate it, really the disaggregated with the more aggregated, so that we aggregated things at whatever level that is desirable for you to make decisions, right? And to preserve people confidentiality and anonymity and so on, so they can pass that on to the health officials so that they can implement some interventions as needed. We did talk really about really the fact that some of the elements of GeoAI are not necessarily brand new, really because it's the result of an evolution. But really, we are at the cusp really of a time that is really very important really for us to play an active role in the use of these technologies in our discipline of GI science, of geography, but also to make our work really known in the non-geospatial sphere, so that they understand that we can help solve problems, we can help understand the complexity of what's going on at different locations in the geographic space. And through that very complex, very wicked type of problem of infectious disease spread across space and through time, we are demonstrated through 3 increasingly complex modeling frameworks and modeling environment how this can be done. This is not the state of the art, this is still work in progress, of course, but what I wanted to communicate to you that we can do much better if we apply ourselves and incorporate some of the fundamental elements of GeoAI. And this was the last slide of my talk, so thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Professor Thill, for the keynote speech. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, you can go into, yes. I'm very generous to give you time to present. Okay, let's keep going without coffee break. Sorry. If you need a cup of coffee, you can get one in the coffee station. It's definitely free, so you can enjoy. All right. It is now a pleasure to introduce Professor Yuki Akiyama here to talk about the research for DXing municipal decision-making using urban spatial information, AI, to realize a better life. Dr. Yuki Akiyama, no, can you talk? Okay. Okay. Dr. Yuki Akiyama is an associate professor in Faculty of Architecture and Urban Design at Tokyo City University. His major is spatial information science and its related studies. He has published more than 300 papers on spatial information science and received many domestic and international awards. He is a visiting researcher at the Center for Spatial Information Science at the University of Tokyo and a visiting associate professor at the Center for Urban and Real Estate Sciences, Institute of International Studies, Reitaku University. He was also a visiting researcher at KRIHS in 2015 and 2017. Please welcome Professor Yuki Akiyama.
Okay, so thank you very much. My presentation. So today I'd like to talk about these titles, the research for the DXing and municipal decision making, so using urban spatial information and AI to realize a better life. So thank you very much to introduce me for the chairperson. So 안녕하세요. 저 백수입니다. 제 이름은 아키야마 유키라고 합니다. 잘부탁합니다. Thank you very much. Okay, so now I started my presentation. So I can change my slide. So how to change? Okay, so now I'm my brief self-introduction. I'm Yuki Akiyama. So I'm from the Tokyo City University. I'm the associate professor. So my major is spatial information science. And I also does a visiting researcher or visiting the associate professor in some private university and the University of Tokyo. And I also a member of the private company, some of the venture companies in Japan. Okay, so, and in addition, I also stayed in, I've been to stay in Korea, and I'm also the visiting researcher in a KRIHS between 2015 to the 2017. So, and in addition, I visited Korea so many times to join the international conference or the seminars. So I also like the many Korean food, especially the naengmyeon, nakji, boku, and so on. Okay. So now I move to today's outline. So today I'd like to talk about 3 contents. First one is a brief introduction of my research activities, and the second one is the introduction of the research using the urban spatial information and the AI. for the DXing the municipal decision making. In this part, I introduced two kinds of the research in the domestic and the international examples. And third, finally, I introduced the potential of the advanced spatial information and the AI for the DXing the municipal decision making. Okay. So then at first, I'd like to talk about the background of my research. So as you know, there are so many problems in the urban areas. So I show you this example. And to resolve these problems, we need to design the urban planning or the transportation planning to resolve these problems and to realize the smart city or the smart society. And to realize to support to design these planning, the spatial information is very useful. Okay. And in case of Japan, there are so many spatial data is available. For example, this is the example of the static spatial information. So, for example, the detailed digital map and commercial areas data, the statistics. At the times, we also may collect so many kinds of spatial data from the web to use the API. And in addition, recently we are also use dynamic data in the person flow big data, the mobile flow big data. So, and we call such kind of the very detailed spatial data called the micro geodata. And in our research, our laboratory research strategy is we use recently we can use many kinds of spatial data, the micro geodata, the spatial big data, satellite image data, and in addition we also use municipal data, municipal owned data. This data is basically not the open data, basically closed data. But recently, we can access. We try to access the municipality and to try to use such kind of spatial data. And in addition, also we make the field survey and to integrate the many kinds of the data and to use the GIS or the AI and the many kinds of the statistics approach. We make the finding and the resolution of the urban problems and to resolve the such kind of problems to resolve support. And our research laboratory is to these kind of the data integrated and to resolve the urban problems. Okay, so okay, and this is an example of my laboratory research topics. But in our laboratory, there are so many studies. So today, I'd like to introduce only two kinds of the research. The first one is the development of the estimating the method for the distribution, the spatial distribution of the vacant house in each municipalities. And the second one is to develop the global micropopulation data. Okay. So if you are interested in our laboratory, please visit our lab website. And our laboratory, joint research is always welcome. So if you are interested in it, please contact our laboratory. Okay, so and I want to show this is a very interesting slide. I researched the number of the papers. It contains the geography or the big data in the title or text. This result shows that the number of the paper is increasing rapidly, especially in the last 5 years. So I think the studies on the geospatial information or the geospatial science or the AI is a very significant academic and international impact. Okay, so now I move to the introduction of the research. So using the spatial information, the AI, to support the DXing or the municipal decision making. And in this part, I introduce two kinds of the research. The first one is to estimate the distribution of the vacant house, so using the municipal data and the AI. So this example is in the domestic example. And the second one is to develop the micropopulation data to support the urban development in the developing countries. So this is the international example. Okay, so I start to explain the first example. So In Japan, recently, the number of vacant houses is increasing rapidly. So this is because one of the big reasons is the depopulation. So especially in the rural area, the suburban area. And in addition, many young people want to move to the urban area. And in addition, the aging society in the suburb, especially in not the suburban area, but not only suburban area, but also the city center is also the aging. And after the aging people is dead, the house is abandoned and to become the vacant house. It is a very serious problem in Japan. So recently, the Japanese government make laws and the law is to try to resolve the vacant house problem. And in this law, the Japanese government, the local government, to search the location of the vacant house. But this is a very hard job for the local government. Okay. Basically, the monitoring method for the spatial distribution of the vacant house in Japan is a field survey. Field survey, it means the visual inspection. So, but this method, we need so many time and so many amount of the labor and the cost. So this is because this is a very big burden for the local government. Yes, so we also talk with many local governments, and the other result we find three problems as shown in this slide. The first one is the cost, and the second one is the time, and finally the judge. So this is because the field survey is many cost. For example, in case of the one local government, in case of to search about the 100,000 house, the cost is about 30 million yen. And the time is also so long. So this is because this search is based on the field survey. So in case of the one municipality, it's about the 1 year. So it is so much time. And in addition, the visual inspection is rely on the human judgment. So this is because there is a bias. There is bias in the result depending on the surveyor. So the result has some bias or the variation. So it's a very big problem. So for example, let's try to the visual inspection. So this is a very easy result, easy example. So this is the example in the vacant house in the rural district. But for example, so this is very difficult. It looks very similar, but the second red roof house is the vacant. Only one is the vacant. So this is very difficult to detect the vacant house from the visual inspection. So in this research, so we use so many kinds of the method. For example, using the municipal data, or in addition, we also make the judge based on the building image by the AI, or using drone or the open sensor. So we make so many methods. But in this time, there are the time is limitation. So I explain only the one example, the left one, in using the municipal data and the AI. Okay. So in this method, we use so many kinds of the municipal data. For example, the register data, and the tax data, and the water consumption data, and some open data. And to integrate all data in one map and to make the database. And after that, to integrate all kinds of data. And in addition, some municipalities also make the field survey. And the field survey result is the training data. And to integrate all data into one spatial data, and to make to calculate by this data by the AI, that we make the model to detect the vacant house. And finally, we can get the result to the vacant house rate of each household, each detached house. Okay, so this is an example of the result. So you can see each location of the vacant house, each point of the vacant house location, and the color means the vacant house rate. In case of this city, if the vacant house rate is over 50%, this house is a vacant house. And we can also make the grid map and based on each point data. And based on these results, so we can detect, we can make the information for the municipality. So the municipality can provide the areas where the vacant house surveys should be contributed. So this data can support the vacant house problem in the municipalities. Okay, oh, sorry. And the reliability also the very, the model is very fine. Especially this model can detect the non-vacant house with a very high reliability. And in addition, we also make such kind of same kind of the research not only in the one city but so many kind of the cities. In case of the urban area, we can get a very good result. The model makes a very fine result. Okay, but in this year, we also expand not only the urban area, so but also rural areas. So this is one of the example in the Hakuba village in the Nagano prefecture. It's a very rural area, the mountainous areas. But in case of such kind of the rural areas, there are no field survey results. So in this case, we go to this village and to make the field survey in the all detached house in this village. Okay. Okay, so I show you the results of the first example. Especially the problem to use the municipal data in case of Japan. I guess in case of Japan, the collect and utilize the municipal data is not so easy. So this is because the municipal data is very reliable, but this data contains personal data, so privacy data. So it's very difficult to utilize. But the municipal data is very reliable and pinpoint and very well managed data. So it's very so it's very useful for the municipal DXing or the make the decision making to make the more smart. So I think there is a possibility that the local government will provide the municipal data if we can show the objective and the usefulness of these data clearly. But basically, in the Japanese government, it's very conservative, so it's not so easy. So, but we are now to continue to try to utilize such kind of data. Okay, so this is the first example. Okay, so now let's move to the second example. Okay, the second example is to develop the micro-population data to support the urban development or the transportation planning or urban planning in the developing countries. Okay, so I explain about the background of this research. So as you know, especially in the developing countries, the urban areas, the rapid urbanization and the population increasing is very rapidly in such kind of area. So in the urban area in the developing countries, the proper urban planning or the transportation planning is very important. So this is because we need to make the sustainable development in such kind of developing countries, urban area. So this is because this area is population is increases very, very rapidly. So it's very important to manage the urban development or the urban expansion. So to realize the proper urban planning or the development, so the population information is a very essential information for to plan the proper urban planning or the development. But in case of the developing countries, the population census is not so well managed. Yes. In this study, our target area is Tokyo and Bangkok in Thailand. In case of Thailand, the population census is updated every 10 years. So the population census in 2010, and the latest population census is 2020, but it's not so opened well. And another kind of the population census in Thailand is opened by each municipalities. But the municipality population data is based on the birthplace of the residents. So this is not the residential location. This data is aggregated based on the birthplace. So this data is not the real population data. So it's very difficult to monitor the population distribution in the latest condition from the municipal population data. So it's a very, this is the example, the very difficulty point to monitor the population in case of the Thailand. Okay, so in this study, we already make the micropopulation data in the developed countries in Tokyo. In case of Tokyo, we can use the many very detailed map data of the population data, census data, and based on this data, we can make the model to estimate the population of each building. Okay, but on the other hand, in the case of the developing countries, for example, the Bangkok, there are no data of the detailed building data with the building use, the building type, or the building height. So in this study, we make the model to estimate the population of each building, of each building type or the building height in the developed countries in Tokyo. On the other hand, in case of the Bangkok, we make the deep learning model to detect the building shape or the building location, not only the building location, but also the building type and the building height. And after that, we can make the building data, and to integrate the AI model, we can detect we can make the population data of each building, not only in developed countries, but also developing countries in case of Bangkok. Yes, so this is a brief method. The first one is make the training data, and after that make the deep learning model, and finally extract the building. This slide shows the example of only the extracted building, but our method is not only the extracted building, but also the estimated building type or the building height. And this model is the reliability is relatively good, but if we check the reliability, we need to collect the real data of each building shape or the location or the building type or the population. But in case of Tokyo, such kind of data is available, but the Bangkok, there are no data. So in this study, we make the field survey, okay? And we are now to collect real data in Bangkok building data. This is the example of the survey in the last month in the Bangkok, the city center of the Bangkok, the suburban area of Bangkok. And to collect such kind of data, the location of the building and the type of the building height, or the number of the household in case of the condominiums. Okay. And this is the prototype of the micropopulation data in Bangkok. Each point is the number of the household, number of the residents of each household. Okay. This is the Tongro district. This is the center of the Bangkok area, and this is Thonburi district in the local residential area. And now we also try to utilize such kind of very detailed spatial data to collaborate with the local researchers or the government or the Japanese the JICA project. So, and now that we are discuss with the local private sector, the government sector, and how to make the decision making is smart in the Thailand. Okay. So so now I move to the conclude my presentation. Okay. In this era, this is I think it's a very interesting era. In case of, I guess not only in Japan, but also all over the world, that this era is urban engineering and to integrate the IT. In case of Japan, recently there are so many companies that collaborate with the smart city project. Not only in the urban engineering company, but also the IT companies, the car companies. So there are so many kind of the companies join the smart city project. So I think in this era, in the near future, the urban planning will change as for this slide, but maybe this is my thinking. And the first one is we can use the closed data. This is because I expected the anonymized techniques will be improved. So it is expected to use closed data or the municipal data. And in addition, recently the personal flow data from the mobile phone data is available, and it is expected to be the real-time data is available. Real-time big data is available. And the third one is I expected the AI will be utilized the society and the local government, and the AI will make the many candidate answers. Okay, so it is expected to the human job is to choose which answer will be applied in the real local government policy making or but I think the very important point is the choice is made by human. Okay, if the choice is also made the AI, I'm really afraid it will really make the Terminator. It's very not so good society. So the choice is made by humans, I think so. And the final one is also very increasing. It's I'm sorry that the more text breaking that created the reason to make the action based on the data, or the data means evidence. Based on the many kind of the result of the evidence, we can make the quicker and the fast actions. And based on these actions, we can change the society or the local government more quickly or more smartly, I expect. Okay, so this is the final slide. So finally, so the national government, the local government, and the private companies have now so many kind of the spatial data, the very useful data, or the statistics. So to collect or integrate and use these kind of data, it is there is a great potential to create a new value from such kind of data. And in addition to integrate the AI method, the AI will make the potential to support the create new data for the value. And to promote the utilization of the data and the statistics, the MX is a mind transformation. It's more necessary than DX. So it means that in case of Japan, or especially the Japanese government, they are very conservative. So that they need to change their mind and to utilize the data or the sensors and to make the more smart decision making. Okay. So now I finished my presentation. So if you are interested in my research, please visit my website. So thank you very much. 감사합니다.
Thank you, Professor Akiyama, for sharing your excellent research. Okay, next. Our next speaker is Professor Filip Biljecki. Today he will present urban modeling with emerging geospatial data sets and AI. Dr. Filip Biljecki is an assistant professor at the National University of Singapore and the founder of the NUS Urban Analytics Lab. He holds a Master of Science and a PhD degree from the Delft University of Technology in the Netherlands. Filip's research and teaching are converging geometric engineering, geospatial technologies, and urban data science to support the digital twins and data-driven urban planning. Please give a warm welcome to Professor Filip Biljecki. The floor is yours. Yeah.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks to the Institute for inviting me, having me here, and also thanks to Jason for the organization. So in the next 25 minutes, I'd like to talk about the research at my group at the National University of Singapore that I joined 6 years ago. So my research group that's called NUS Urban Analytics Lab works at the intersection of urban data science and geospatial engineering. One of our missions is to break the silos between GIS science people and urban planning. And we focus on analytics like many research groups in the similar domains around the world. But we realized in our journey in the last few years is that it's beneficial to do this with a strong geospatial foundation. So we also work on traditional GIS science topics like data acquisition. Our mission is to make data better, find novel ways to acquire data, and topics like data quality. So I'm also quite happy to speak after Professor Akiyama-san because he also mentioned some data completeness issues. This is very similar to what we are also working on. And we realized that urban analytics benefits quite a lot when you have all these focuses under the same roof, done in the same research group. In the last few years, our focus has been mostly on understanding the potential and application of emerging urban data sources. For example, 3D city models, infrared thermography, and street view imagery. These topics, these data sets are relatively new, so there is a lot of potential in applying research on, let's say, data quality to understand these emerging urban data sources. For example, we have been working on developing a data quality framework to assess the reliability of street-level imagery. And like many of you here, we focus on Geo AI. I'm also happy that I can speak after the nice keynote by Professor Thill because he explained quite a lot about Geo AI, so I don't have to give another introduction. And lately, we have been mostly focusing on the application of computer vision and generative adversarial networks. And finally, we've been focusing quite a lot on crowdsourced data. So the last presentation by Professor Akiyama has mentioned government data quite a lot. We also use government data quite a lot. But we think there is a lot of value in using crowdsourced data as well. And we are at the moment about 20 full-time researchers. The group grew quite a lot since I established it a few years ago. And we are based in Singapore, the heart of Southeast Asia. It's a specific place, it's a city-state, which has also shaped our research agenda. And we are pretty much the only group in Southeast Asia working on this topic, so we are always interested to establish collaborations in this part of the world. So please feel free to reach out to me if you are interested to talk more. So why do we care about crowdsourcing? There have been wonderful developments in the last years on crowdsourced geospatial information. There have been many papers published on using Twitter data, for example. And perhaps the most popular crowdsourced spatial data set would be OpenStreetMap. And I think OpenStreetMap explains quite well our motivation why use crowdsourced data. So I took a screenshot from this area here around Kintex. And I was quite impressed by the quality of of OpenStreetMap. And in fact, OpenStreetMap in many cities around the world, in many countries, both developed and less developed, is of really high quality. So crowdsourced data, one appealing thing is that it is often of high quality, perfectly usable for urban analytics. Another motivation is that crowdsourced data often can capture some phenomena that government data cannot capture. It often embeds a lot of local knowledge. And OpenStreetMap is not the only crowdsourced dataset we have been using. We used Mapillary, CartaView. We have been focusing on real estate portals as a new form of crowdsourced geospatial data, Airbnb, and so on. So that brings me to the first example of what we do, actually. We are focusing on how to make spatial data better. So the case I've shown you in OpenStreetMap is not the level of quality I've shown you in OpenStreetMap in the last slide is not found in all parts of the world. For example, if you check OpenStreetMap in some regions like Indonesia, you will see that there are many data completeness issues. For example, here we have a town on the island of Java where buildings are almost entirely left out, but street networks and some other features are very well mapped. And we've been exploring Southeast Asia quite a lot, and we realized there are many instances of this phenomena that we call geospatial data asymmetry. So one urban spatial data feature like street networks is very well mapped, while on the other hand, another type like building footprints are almost entirely overlooked. And we've been looking into how can we take advantage of one type of spatial data to help acquire or improve the quality of another type of spatial data. So 2 years ago, we developed a completely new way to acquire spatial data using generative adversarial networks. And this work that we call GenMapper, and which was published in ICGIS, takes street networks as input and predicts building footprints. It predicts their shape, size, and location based on the morphology of the street networks. GenMapper was tested on dozens of cities around the world, and even though, as expected, it's not like 100% accurate, obviously, we found it to be a relatively useful approach to fill these data gaps around the world in places where we don't have any data at the level of quality which could actually be sufficient for some use cases like urban climate. So here are some examples of the predictions using GenMapper from a few cities around the world. In the first column, you see the input. We use only street networks. In the second column, you can see the output, so the predicted building footprints. And the third column contains the ground truth. So we tested this on cities where we have pretty good building footprint completeness. And yeah, the result, as expected, is not 100% accurate, but we believe that it's good enough to get an idea of roughly the number of buildings in an area, their shape and size. And GenMapper then, in the extension of this research, it paved the way for developing a completely new way to assess spatial data completeness. So in OpenStreetMap, as you have seen in one of the previous slides, there are some areas that are very well mapped and some areas where building footprints are completely missing. But the issue is that we don't really know which of these areas are undermapped. There isn't really an automated way to automatically detect what are the districts in a city that are mapped less than others. So we have applied GenMapper on OpenStreetMap by predicting roughly from street networks, which are almost always fully mapped, roughly the number of buildings that there should be there. And then we compare this to the number of buildings that is actually mapped in OpenStreetMap. And thanks to GenMapper, and thanks to this newly introduced spatial data completeness detection method, we are able to flag districts in cities around the world that are undermapped. So we tested this approach across the world, and here is an example. I think this is Seattle, which has quite heterogeneous data quality that identifies which of the districts are, what is the predicted level of completeness of building footprints and which of the districts are undermapped. Another line of research is understanding overlooked types of urban data, especially if they are crowdsourced. And one of them are Airbnb reviews. So we found that Airbnb reviews, even though they are quite widespread, it's relatively easy to obtain them, they have never really been used in GIS science. And our hypothesis was that this is a latent type of volunteer geographic information. So we've been then looking into the content of Airbnb reviews to understand how it can help urban data science and data-driven urban planning. And we found that in most reviews, people talk about the host where they stayed. They talk about the quality of accommodation, for example, the quality of the bed, the cleanliness, and so on. But then we also found that people like to talk about their neighborhood. And actually many people do that. For example, people mention the quality of public transportation in the neighborhood, the density of amenities, greenery, sense of crime, and so on. And in this work, we have thought that Airbnb could be a new way to sense neighborhoods in cities. So we developed a workflow largely based on natural language processing that automatically detects these subsets of reviews that talk about the neighborhood and gauges the quality of the neighborhood across different dimensions. And this paper that we published in Cities a few months ago focuses on 5 aspects. One is the quality of greenery in a city. Second, public transport accessibility. Third is a sense of crime. For example, people talk, I really like the house. The host was very friendly, but I didn't really feel safe walking to that house. Another aspect that was quite interesting to look into is noise, because in the reviews, people tend to mention that they couldn't sleep because it was quite noisy. And we thought that this could be a proxy to map noise intensities and make noise maps of cities. And finally, we have looked into the density of amenities. And what you see here is a map of London that suggests the amount of greenery across the city at the neighborhood scale. And this was obtained solely from Airbnb reviews. So this work gives a bit of more of an explanation of our research agenda. So we are also looking into finding these urban data sets, preferably crowdsourced, that have not been really examined, and look into their quality and usability for urban planning. And in case you're curious, we have validated these results. We try to connect them with ground truth data from municipalities, and in most cases, in most cities we analyzed, we found a moderately strong correlation. In the last few years, we have also been looking into rooftops, which have been quite a popular topic among local governments and urban planners in Singapore and beyond. So rooftops, especially in dense cities, offer valuable space to install solar panels, to vegetate them, to have green roofs, but also even to grow food. For example, in the middle, you can see a photo of a farm that was installed on the top of a residential building in Singapore. And rooftops have been in focus of many governments around the world and many researchers. And research tends to focus on two main lines of research. First is identifying what are the best locations, for example, to install solar panels. In those cases, researchers typically use 3D models, and they find what are the sunniest rooftops and what are the sunniest parts of rooftops to install solar panels. But they also quantify the potential of rooftops at the large scale. For example, let's say you're a local government, you have money to support installing solar panels on 10% of the rooftops in a city or country, then you may be interested to understand how much electricity you can produce. And we really like this research, but we noticed one really interesting research gap is that people like to talk only about the potential of rooftops in the future. But what's interesting is that governments and researchers, they don't know what is the actual situation of rooftops at the moment. For example, how many rooftops are currently utilized for photovoltaic panels. And in this project, which we call Roofpedia, we aspire to build the first global open registry of rooftops for urban sustainability. So we use satellite images to map the content of 1 million rooftops across 20 cities around the world to understand how many rooftops have solar panels, how many of them are vegetated. And this paper was published in Landscape and Urban Planning. And this is an example for Singapore. We have identified rooftops with solar panels. And Roofpedia works in this way. It has 3 pillars. The first one is the mapping part. We use satellite imagery. We use image segmentation to detect these 2 types of objects. Then if the rooftop of the building has either of the 2, we tag the building footprint. We add an attribute. We take the building footprints from OpenStreetMap. And that brings us to the second part of the project, where we map them at the city scale. So we have produced a series of interactive maps where people can explore the spatial distribution of these so-called sustainable rooftops. And third, because we do it for many cities around the world, we try to benchmark cities. Of course, cities are different. They cannot be easily compared. But we try to understand how cities compare with each other in terms of the utilization of rooftops for either solar panels or greenery. In the last few years, we have also been focusing quite a lot on street view imagery. So thanks to great developments and efforts by companies like Google, we have a goldmine of urban data. For example, Google has collected more than 200 billion images across thousands of cities, and many research groups have been using this data set as well around the world. And we are using it lately primarily to understand human perception, to map infrastructure, to understand human activities, and to map the urban form from the pedestrian point of view. So we focus quite a lot on mapping the amount of greenery pedestrians see, the amount of visible sky from a street point, and the amount of visible buildings. And then when aggregated, this data can be quite useful for many domains. For example, this is a map of Singapore where we have calculated the sky view factor at a district scale. And this data is used by urban climate scientists to explain the urban heat island effect. It's used by many different domains, for example, even transportation and real estate, to explain housing prices. And this kind of research has been conducted all over the world in the urban analytics domain, but we have also been lucky to develop some new use cases that I want to share with you. For example, one of them is developed by one of our graduate students. It's on bikeability. So he has developed a workflow that takes street view images across the whole city and assesses bikeability based on lots of criteria that were developed as part of this work. And the end result are maps of bikeability of cities. A new use case that we developed is related to noise. So in many countries around the world, especially in the European Union, cities produce noise maps to understand how residents are affected by traffic noise, industrial noise, and so on. And often these kind of maps can be complicated to produce because they either require expensive simulation software or they require field measurements. So you can imagine that measuring noise at so many points in a city is quite complicated and tedious. And in our research, we have thought about using street view imagery to predict soundscapes or noise in cities. So we found that street view images can actually be a new instrument to sense noise because lots of features they contain, they may more or less indicate the intensity of noise across a road network. For example, the presence of greenery, the size of the road, amount of traffic, and so on. And in this work, which was published in CUS, we have trained a model based on real measurements across Singapore that predicts noise across a city solely from imagery. So what you see here is a map of the city state that indicates the amount of noise intensity across the city. And we have validated this method. We found a moderately strong correlation. So in a way, we introduced a new and cheap way to create noise maps that are not necessarily super accurate, like those that are produced by governments, but they could be used in cities that don't have any kind of noise maps. And in our work, we have also expanded this method to Shenzhen in China, and we have also decoupled the soundscapes into multiple types of noise. For example, traffic noise, natural sounds, and also we identified locations with a pleasant type of soundscape. And finally, I'd like to share another research that we have published just a few months ago in Landscape and Urban Planning. It's a new way to understand the design of streetscapes in cities, also using street view imagery. So we develop a workflow that takes images from Google Street View, so hundreds of thousands of them in the case of Singapore. And the clustering approach automatically identifies what are the typical designs of streetscapes in a city. And in the case of Singapore, we have detected these 6 clusters of streetscapes, and we gave them some names. For example, the first one at the top left, we call it urban jungle. It's a typical scene that you can see in the center of the city. Clusters 4 and 5 is something we call balanced living and concrete heights. These are typical streetscapes that you can see in residential areas in Singapore. And because we do this at the city scale, we are able to understand the spatial distribution of these streetscapes. For example, the red one is the first one I told you about. And you can see it's mostly concentrated in the central area of the city, corresponding to the actual design of streetscapes. And in this work, we also realized that the temporal aspect of street view imagery has been almost entirely unexplored. So Google Street View has been around for like 15 years, even more. And in many cities, they conducted multiple surveys. And this kind of data, in this kind of researchers tend to use only the latest available information and ignore the rest. And we realized that there is this research gap of using temporal street view imagery. So in Singapore, first time they arrived in 2008. They mapped the whole city. Then they came again in 2015. And last time they imaged the city, it was 2021. And we took advantage of this, which wasn't possible 10 years ago when Google Street View was still quite new. And we have developed a new way to sense urban changes. So we deployed the same clustering approach that I have just shown to you, but on these 3 different periods. And we found that this method, and also thanks to temporal street view imagery, can be used as a new way to sense changes in a city and understand which streets did change the most. And again, because we do this at the city scale, we are able to understand what has been the relationship between these clusters across the last 10 or 20 years. We are able to understand how the city has changed, at least visually, in the last decade. So this plot shows the share of each cluster across these 3 periods in the last 15 years and how they changed between the surveyed periods. And we found that this method can be used to validate government policies because the Singapore government is very focused on making the city greener. And we found that this method confirms that because those clusters of streetscapes that are greener expanded in the last 15 years. So that brings me to the end of my presentation. I hope that you learned about our research agenda and recent work. We are always, of course, happy to have chats. We are just a 6-hour flight away, so you're welcome in Singapore. And I'd like to conclude this with some takeaways about what we learned in the last 5 years. So we think that urban analytics is more than just analytics. We think that it's really beneficial to understand the entire geospatial pipeline. So we think that urban analytics should go beyond analytics. It should also include data production, research on spatial data quality, and data standardization. And understanding that helped us also a lot in understanding how can data be used for certain domains and use cases. Second takeaway is that, yeah, these days, and we are also guilty of that, we focus a lot on GeoAI. We focus a lot on new kinds of data to do research that wasn't possible 10 years ago without these developments, especially really impressive developments in computer vision. But we think that we should really also pay attention to traditional GIS science topics like data availability and data quality. And in that, we think that crowdsourced data plays an important role. We think it's great, and we think it will become even greater. It will grow in importance and availability because it has lots of advantages over other kinds of data, and it's complementary to it. So thank you for having me here. I also like to acknowledge my team. This is not only my work. There are lots of people in my lab who work really hard to do interesting stuff. And we have a website where you can learn more information. We are also quite active on social media. Feel free to follow us, and I'll be happy to have chats. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Biljecki, for the exciting presentation. Our next speaker is Professor Stephen Jige Quan. Today, he will present Addressing Urban Complexity with AI Toward the Sustainable City Future. Dr. Quan is an associate professor and the director of the City Energy Lab in the Graduate School of Environmental Studies at Seoul National University in South Korea. His research interests include smart and sustainable urban systems, urban form and energy, AI-aided design, and sustainable zoning system. Stephen worked as a department chief planner at Beijing Tsinghua Urban Planning and Design Institute in China. Stephen holds a Bachelor of Architecture and a Master of Engineering or Urban Planning from Tsinghua University in China, and a Master of Science in Computer Science, and a PhD in City and Regional Planning from Georgia Institute of Technology. Please welcome Professor Stephen Jige Quan. Oh, you are all there. Okay, thank you. The mic is yours.
Thank you, Dr. Sun, for the introduction, and thank you for the invitation to this great conference. I'm very happy to be here and to share some of my recent works. And the previous talks were very inspiring, so we learned a lot of the general geo AI applications, comparisons between different methodologies and their applications in health system from Dr. Thill, and the data collection, new data generation from Akiyama-san, and from Filip, we learned a lot of the application of computer vision to the urban planning, to the new data generation. So today I'm going to talk about our research that is around the topic of addressing urban complexity with AI. But we have a general goal of the sustainable city development. So we have been already aware of that, the fact that we are in a new era of AI. The AI has been transforming many fields, including the geography, including planning and design. And such a transformation has been fueled by more data generated every day, and many, many new algorithms proposed and applied every day. At the same time, we are facing this big challenge, right? The challenge is not only global, but also local. We have a global climate change challenges. But at the local level, those global climate change challenges can lead to more frequent and severe the disaster events, such as heat waves, flooding issues, etc. Besides that, we have other local issues like the urban decline, aging society issues in Asian cities. So nowadays, we are facing so many challenges. But at the same time, fortunately, we have this new tool of AI. Now, how can we utilize this power of AI to better understand and design our cities toward its sustainability? So this is a general topic of my presentation today. So I'm going to talk about this, the explorations toward this question with 3 points, main points. So first, I will talk about how we can reveal urban complexity, especially the interactions and nonlinearities in these very complex urban systems with AI, basically to apply AI to corroborate and improve city science. This is a very big topic. Let's narrow it down to a very small field I have been working on for quite a few years, which is about the relationship between urban form and building energy use. So even within this very narrow and specific field, we can still observe a very complex pathway map. Right? It's our pre-publications upon this review of this field. And you can see such a complexity can scale up quite dramatically when we go beyond the building sector, when we have more considerations other than the energy issues. Then how can we understand such a complexity? I'm going to take this as an example to see how in this very specific field, how people address the relationship in this in terms of interactions and nonlinearities. So a very traditional way is to use simulations, right? And this simulation software can take in the geometries and properties of buildings and then output the energy consumptions. So with the parametric design and simulations, we can control all the other variables and by varying just a variable of interest. And the results suggest that in previous studies, we found that the x-axis is density, FAR, total floor area ratio, and the y-axis is energy consumption per floor area, representing the energy efficiency. As you can see, that there's a general nonlinear relationship, which means it's not just a very simple trend, like the higher density, the better, or higher density, the worse in terms of energy consumption. But it shows a V or U shape, where we can observe an optimal, a possible optimal density that has the best solution for energy consumptions. Such a conclusion has been supported by other research as well, as you can see by the scholars from Cambridge, from other universities. We also have observed similar nonlinear patterns. So this is from simulation. You can use parametric design to simulate just the response to one variable. Another method is a traditional method in using regression models, but as Dr. Thill already mentioned, that the traditional regression models have very strong assumptions on this normality, linearity, and this collinearity, heteroscedasticity issues. But of course, we can do some tricks to understand the nonlinear relationships. For example, we can have these variable transformations, or we can have interaction terms, or we could have more complex models like the quantile regression, or we can have these generative additive models, GAM. However, usually they also need to follow certain assumptions, right? So they need some prior. Right? But how to define the prior? This can be a big issue. Of course, during our previous studies, we figured out that we could, in some sense, identify the nonlinear relationship between the density and the building energy use. Today I'm going to talk about how we can use this supervised learning to understand such a nonlinearity. So this shows the application of the gradient boosting trees, especially XGBoost, to the two cities to understand their relationship between the urban form patterns and energy consumption. One city is Chicago, another one is Seoul. This highlighted ones are about the relationship between density and energy consumption per floor area. As you can see, this kind of confirm this relationship we found from simulation studies, but still we found this varies across cities. So currently we are trying to look into why it differs from city to city, what makes this nonlinear relationship still vary, but overall they show nonlinear patterns, highly nonlinear patterns. Actually, this method is to use the partial dependence plot and interpretability analysis upon this trend machine learning models. But this method is not new. We talked about that 2 years ago, 3 years ago. We can say it's new. I can say it's a new method, but now it's not new. Everyone can do that. Currently, we are working on some specific issues in this workflow. First, the model fitting matters. Right? So basically, we have this model trained on data, but the quality of model can depend heavily on the hyperparameter tuning and the training workflow. So we're testing how we can compare different training methods and to find a better models to have more reliable results. And second one is about the spatial location, right? Because we're talking about GeoAI, but in current research in applying the supervised learning models to understand urban phenomena and use this interpretability analysis to understand the relationships, usually neglect the spatial location issue. So here we just test this idea with a very simple method by incorporating the longitude and the latitude location information of the data into a simulation. So this shows the map of the weather station in Seoul, and we are working on this for every station. We have their urban form patterns surrounding stations, and we have their urban heat island effect data. We try to use this urban form pattern to predict the urban heat effects. And we tested this prediction idea with different type of models, with a traditional OS model, with spatial regression model, segment model in particular, and with traditional supervised learning model, GPT model, and with a new GPT model considering the location. And turned out the gradient boosting decision trees with the location information performs much better than all the other models, showing that the location matters. We should pay attention to location. But of course, this is a very simple way of incorporating the geolocation information. But we could have more discussion on that, including the cross-validation parts. And the third one we are working on is basically the reflection on this explorative nature of these nonlinear patterns. So basically, we compare the nonlinear relationships identified by the machine learning models and the linear pattern found from the traditional regression models, and we can compare them. So the reason why we have the comparison is that we see the machine learning models as more explorative methods because they do not give us the significance levels. However, they provide us some new observations and new understandings of relationships, those could serve as the starting point of generating new hypotheses and new theories. So this shows the first step, right? We understand the relationship, understand their differences and similarities, and next step is we could further use that as the direction for a more complex regression models to generate new theories. So it's about our first direction, about using the machine learning to reveal the urban complexity. So here I'm going to talk about the second one. But before taking this, I look into a second aspect. I'm going to talk about this general issue in urban studies. So let's step back for a while and have a retrospect on what we did when we tried to understand a phenomenon. So basically, we use a lot of indicators to measure this urban phenomenon. And then we try to build the models between the indicators. However, here comes the question. Are we really modeling the urban complexity or the complexity of these indicator systems? So basically, are we representing our urban complexity well enough? So here I'm going to talk about the new method using unsupervised learning to identify the typologies, to go from indicator to typology, to apply AI to find patterns in complex phenomena. So here we can see this is the commonly used indicator systems to measure urban geometry. We can have a lot of cover ratio, FAR, height, sky view factor, HW ratio, etc., etc., etc. So the people found it's not enough. So because all these urban form indicators only reflect a certain aspect of urban geometry. And how about others? So they run into the risk of the underrepresentation of the urban geometry. But on the other hand, scholars have been adding more and more indicators. Like in the recent publication in Landscape and Urban Planning is a review paper of all sustainable urban form indicators. So they summarize over 300 urban form indicators in the field. Can you imagine that? Over 300 indicators. And that can run into another side of the risk, which is over-representation. Because I bet many of the indicators have much overlaps, right? They are highly correlated. Then how could we use them? And this problem is not a new problem. People have been noticed that and addressed this issue, especially in the urban design field. For example, in Seoul, by the Seoul Institute, a study has already been done to identify the typologies of the typical urban areas. But it took a long while. So the Seoul Institute invited a lot of experts, spent a lot of money on it. But still, as you can see, it still only covers a very small proportion of the entire Seoul. All these color ones were the ones identified and analyzed. All the other grades are still unexplored because of the budget, because of the shortage of the labor, and because of the limitation of the time. So then nowadays we have AI. Can we utilize AI to identify typologies? Right? So this is our recent work published in EPB. So basically we use this Gaussian mixture models, clustering method to cluster the urban form patterns in Seoul into 14 types, and considering all kinds of the urban forms. And it turned out those typologies can be a bridge between the scientific research, so many indicators, and the policy making, which requires simplicity and the deterministic properties. Therefore, it can serve as this policy supporting tool. And besides this utilization of using the typology to support design, supporting policy, so what else can we do with that? So basically, we can also link that to the environmental performance, that's the sustainability performance. For example, if we only take the apartment type of the urban form, not the other types, we have 3 types of the urban apartments in Seoul. And we can find whether their energy consumptions are significantly different using ANOVA, and it turns out some typologies show significant difference between them, then this could be a starting point for policy suggestion. Like you don't need to, present in front of the policymaker and mayors the detailed indicators, regression models, coefficient significance, but tell them, okay, we have 3 typologies, and which one is significantly better than the others, to give them a very succinct and straightforward idea. But of course, the performance of urban environment is not static. It's dynamic. It's a time series in many cases, like the energy consumption, because we have energy consumption over 12 months, over a year. Then how about we have another cluster method to cluster this time series into different performance types. And here we have the typology of the urban environment, the form, right? And then on the other hand, we have the performance clusters. Then we can see how they correspond to each other. And we have some correspondence, but some difference, and why. We could further look into that. So this is still ongoing. We published, we presented in a conference. We're still working on this work. But I feel it could be a very useful possible policy support, right, for the urban sustainability development. So I have talked about the understanding the complexity through these nonlinear relationships and the better representations. So those are for the previous and existing urban phenomena. What about the future? So can we reshape our urban complexity? So here I'm going to talk about the work I have been focusing on, the AI-aided design. So to apply AI to integrate science into planning and design process to reshape our urban complexity in the future. I'm going to talk about 3 the case studies very, very quickly. I know I'm under pressure of the time limit. So the first case is about Shanghai, right? So how about we develop a sustainable neighborhood in Shanghai? And the first objective, of course, is about the land price, right? Because it's a super expensive land area in Shanghai. And if we want to develop a neighborhood, people want to have more floor areas, and people want to have higher FAR. So the first objective is how we can maximize FAR given a specific design schemata. So here we use a 3x3 matrix to represent a very simple neighborhood design, and with 4 parameters to define a design, with only a few constraints to define the design. Then we can use this optimization method, in particular the genetic algorithms, to find better and better solutions through the optimization process. And finally, we found that it's because of all these regulations and the consideration of daylighting, safety, and privacy, you cannot have as tall building as you want. But the maximum FAR you can achieve on this very simple design schemata is around 2.6. Right? And so here the story just starts. Why? Because the FAR and all development density is only one aspect of urban development. We do have other considerations like the carbon emission. We want to have less energy consumption. We want to have better and better outdoor human comfort. So we can apply the similar approach to find better and better designs that have lower carbon emissions and better human comfort with the help of the urban scale simulation models. Then a big issue emerged, right, which is whether we have the same best design according to different objectives. Right? Do we have the same best design for the FAR, or is it the lowest energy consumption pattern, or is it the pattern with the highest human comfort? It turns out it's not, right? So basically saying if you have higher density, you have less human comfort, you have more impact effect. Right? So then how can we deal with the multi-objective nature of urban plan design? So here I learned from this engineering field, this is actually not a new problem. Right? For airplane design, only deal with the trade-off between different objectives. So we apply the multi-objective optimization in engineering to figure out the Pareto front, which represent the non-dominated and equally optimal solutions. And which one is better depends on your weights for the different objectives. And so on the left side shows that for the three axes representing three objectives, how the Pareto front are distributed in this objective space. And those highlighted ones are objective fronts. And those small dots, they are the dominated and inferior design solutions. And so in general, we have 38 equally optimal solutions in the Pareto front and realized on the right side. And why we need that? Why we need that? Right? This is because think of the design and planning process. Usually, when we have this design and planning task, we generate design based on certain formulation of the objectives and present in front of the mayors or the department, the directors. Then after that, possibly the mayor said, no, I don't want it. Right? And then you need to go back and repeat the whole design process and present a new design. Again, this is very time inefficient and it causes a lot of communication and it's an inefficiency. So now you just present those 38 designs. And because they represent in general the different possible designs, consider all kinds of objectives. Then city mayors may change the mind and say, okay, then I have a relatively close design to that. Do you like it or not? Right? So you can better support the communication process in design planning. And of course, this is a very simple design. It's more like a toy problem. I'm going to take about 1 minute or two to talk about how we can scale it up, right? So I want to use the case of Gangnam superblock. Right? It is 800 by 800 meters superblock pattern with a very complex fabric within it. So by the similar idea, but here with more parameters, we can represent a superblock in Gangnam with more than 300 parameters and more than 20 constraints. And we use genetic algorithm and with the urban scale building energy simulation model we developed, we can simulate and optimize the design to find the best design in terms of the energy consumption for Gangnam superblock. So if we are given a task of redesign Gangnam superblock, we could refer to those best designs. And since there are the randomness in the genetic algorithm, we run the optimization twice, and similarly, they reach exactly the same energy consumption results. However, the corresponding layouts are slightly different, right? So they may be due to the sensitivity of some urban form patterns and some building layout to the energy consumption. Right? But in general, they share a great similarity. So this is about the AI design, how we can use AI to support the design process to reshape our urban complexity. But still, we have a big issue about simulation because the urban simulation can be very time consuming, as Dr. Thill have already mentioned. Then we are working on the surrogate modeling to reduce the time span of simulation. But in here, it's involved uncertainty issues. So we're trying to deal with all these issues. But the one thing missing from all these previous AIAD is that the public participation is not considered. But plan design is bottom up by its nature. Then how we can integrate not only city science and big data, but also public participation. So this is my new framework out of the 3 points and their reflections. So basically saying we want to climb up this participation ladder to have a better and better citizen control. To go from design for the public, where the planner designers, they can, they think they can represent the public, to design with the public, to have the participatory GIS information and opinion collection and reflection, to the design by the public, which means the public can generate their own designs without the core role of planners and designers. So can we apply AI and big data to better support design empowerment? Now, of course, we have a lot of issues about how to represent design knowledge, etc. And we use it again, the same technique as Filip talked about, with the GAN to, and this basically means the GAN is a mini-math game. And the public can be given many, many data sets about urban environment, and they can choose the ones they like most. And those can be used as input for the GAN. So the GAN is, it's a catch and escape game. So through this process, game theory process, it can generate patterns that mimic the given inputs very much. And then the public can generate the design mimicking the selected designs of their own preference. So those are the generated designs. They are actually the Manhattan, based on Manhattan style. They look very much like Manhattan. But if you look up them on the map, you cannot find them. They are fake. They are generated from this design system. But of course, it's not enough. Why? Because for the design, only mimicking the existing pattern or cases is not enough. We need to follow regulations. We need to achieve better and better performance. So here, we also integrate this safety perception from the police power data, and also incorporate the design regulations such as cover ratio as the design constraints in GAN model. And finally, we can have multiple layers of urban form patterns, and then have this GAN model to run. Finally, we can see that with different regulation targets, we can achieve a different set of designs. So this is the design, all of 81 designs with cover ratio of 0.3. This is with a cover ratio of 0.6. And you can see clear pattern differences. And also, you can see the difference in the tree cover as well. That means this GAN model learned this very complex distribution and correlation between different urban form components. Compared to the safety perception in the existing Manhattan patterns, the generated designs have a significantly higher safety score than the corresponding safety scores in Manhattan, which means we can utilize this method to improve the performance of our generative designs. Okay, so this is still in exploration, but I presented 2 years ago in ECSP conference. So finally, some conclusion. So today I talked about the 3 points to understand better the urban complexity, to reveal urban complexity, especially its interactions and nonlinearity, to represent urban complexity by going from indicator to typology approach, and to reshape urban complexity with the newly developed AIAD method. And finally, I talk about the new framework, integrate city science, big data, and public participation to support this design empowerment. But the final comment I want to make is that nowadays AI is so prevailing that everybody talks about AI plus X. I try to apply AI to any field. But my idea is we should reverse the order. We should say it's planning and design plus AI or geo plus AI. This is because the last thing I want to see is that when we have AI as a hammer in our hand, we see everything as a nail. But it's not the case. We need to look at the issues and problems in different fields and try to find the most appropriate tool to solve them. And of course, the simpler the tool, the better. But if it's necessary, then we can apply AI to deal with that. And then currently, I'm working on supporting the planning with plannable AI to consider fairness, accountability, and transparency in the AI algorithms. And also, I'm working on educating the next generation of geographic students, planning design, and policymakers. So upon this part, I've opened a course series in Seoul National University from 2021. It's already more than 2 years. And first it was 1 class, but upon student request, I turned that into a 2-course series, 1 and 2. And the students, I want to say, they have great potential, much better than us. Right? They're very enthusiastic. They are very self-driven. They are very smart to learn things. With nearly 0 coding experience, They didn't know even how to open Python at the beginning of class. After one semester training, some groups can produce the project like that. Right? Very, very out of expectation, so they have great potential. That one thing, as educators, we need to, give them more support to help them to learn. Okay, so thank you all for your attention. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Professor Quan, for the excellent presentation. Our next speaker is Dr. Jung Today he will introduce a simulation of urban population movement by agent-based modeling methodology and Sejong city policy application. Dr. Jung received a bachelor degree in physics from the Hankuk University of Foreign Studies in Korea in 1997, received a master's degree in computer science from the same university in 1999, and received a PhD in computer science from Jungnam National University in 2016. Since 2001, he has worked in Electronics and Telecommunications Research Institute as a principal researcher. His research interests are embedded operating system, real-time distributed computing, power management system, digital twin data analytics, and software simulation. Please give him a warm round of applause.
Yeah. Thank you. This is Jung. First of all, I'm sorry. I'm sorry that I could not prepare to English presentations. So please use your translator. Thank you. 방금 소개받은 전자통신연구원에서 온 정영준이라고 합니다. 발표를 이렇게 드릴 텐데요. 사실 제가 그 소프트웨어 컴퓨팅을 좀 전문으로 하고 있어서 여기에 지금 그 지리 정보를 전문으로 하고 계신 분들도 많고 정책을 전문을 하고 계셔서 제가 여기서 발표할 자격이 있는지 잘 모르겠다고 생각을 했었습니다만은 근데 좀 발표를 들을 때 느껴지는 것들이 데이터의 중요성에 대해서 다 말씀을 하고 계셔서 좀 용기를 갖고 말씀을 드려보도록 하겠습니다. 제가 발표 드리려고 하는 거는 사실 세종시를 세종시는 한국에 있는 행정 수도로 되어 있는 도시인데요. 세종시를 대상으로 해서 과학적인 정책을 좀 지원하기 위해서 연구를 했던 과제를 설명을 드리려고 합니다. 그리고 그 과제 중에서 일부분에 대한 내용을 좀 발표를 드리려고 하고 있습니다. 과제는 어떤 내용이 있냐면 제가 아무래도 소프트웨어 컴퓨팅을 좀 전공을 하다 보니까 좀 과학적인 데이터를 기반으로 과학적인 정책을 지원하기 위해서 대한민국의 지자체뿐만 아니라 정부 그리고 민간 아니면 또 IoT 모든 데이터를 볼 수 있는 만큼은 최대한 많이 보고 활용하려고 노력을 많이 했고요. 그리고 이런 데이터들을 활용할 때 소프트웨어 전문가가 모든 것을 알 수는 없습니다. 그래서 사실 각 전문가들이 많이 필요한데요. 교통 분야 전문가도 필요하고 그 다음에 국토 전문가도 필요하고 복지 전문가도 필요하고 경제나 소상공인 분들도 많이 만났고 그런 전문가들과 활용해서 데이터를 어떻게 활용할 수 있을지를 되게 노력을 많이 했고 그리고 이런 걸 시스템으로 만들어서 공무원들에게 계속 활용할 수 있는 시스템, 디지털 트윈 시스템을 제공하는 게 목표였습니다. 결론적으로 말씀드리면 좀 잘 되지는 않은 것 같습니다. 왜 그러냐면 저희도 디지털 트윈 시뮬레이션 시뮬레이터도 만들기는 했습니다만 결국은 이 데이터들이 자동으로 피드백되면서 계속 업데이트되는 시스템을 만들고 싶었는데 그러지는 좀 못했던 것 같습니다. 거긴 여러 가지 이유가 있었던 것 같고요. 예, 이게 목표였고 오늘은 제가 했던 연구 중에서 하나를 얘기를 드릴 텐데 결국에는 앞에 교수님께서도 얘기하셨던 에이전트 베이스드 액티비티 모델에 대해서 얘기할 건데 그것도 시민들의 어떤 인구 이동에 대한 것을 분석을 할 수 있는 모델을 좀 만들려고 해봤습니다. 잘 아시겠지만 보통 이제 사회 현상을 분석할 때 탑다운 방식의 이제 통계적인 분석을 많이 하게 되시는데요. 그것만으로는 행정이나 정책에서 활용하기에는 다소간 좀 아쉬움이 있었습니다. 그래서 어떤 방법을 선택하고 싶었냐면 에이전트 베이스드 모델링을 이용해서 시민들의 소셜 시뮬레이션을 좀 하고 싶었었습니다. 그래서 결국에는 신사이징 하고, 그러니까 합성을 좀 하고 싶었었던 겁니다. 근데 이 연구가 좀 과거에는 잘 안 됐는지 좀 찾아봤더니 이유가 결국에는 이런 ABM을 만들기 위해서는 마이크로 데이터들이 필요한데 그 마이크로 데이터들을 식별하고 수집하는 게 너무나 어려웠다. 두 번째는 그런 것들이 많아지면 많아질수록 컴퓨팅 파워가 부족해서 우리가 어떤 정책을 만들기 위해서 한 달 동안 시뮬레이션하고 2달 동안 시뮬레이션하고 이런 일이 생길 수 있다는 거죠. 그래서 이런 문제들을 좀 해결하는데 조금이나마 기여를 해보고자 연구를 했습니다. 그래서 이 모든 문제를 다 해결할 수는 없고 저희는 이제 도시에 시민들의 이동 상황을 좀 분석을 좀 해서 그들이 어디를 가는지, 왜 가는지, 어떤 탈 것 수단을 이용해서 가는지를 좀 분석을 하면 교통에서도 버스 노선에도 좀 활용할 수도 있고 복지에도 활용할 수 있고 또 어떤 지역에 어떤 남성이 가는지 20대 여성이 가는지를 활용하면 소상공인들도 좀 더 상권 분석에 활용할 수 있다라는 생각을 들어서 이런 시스템을 만들기로 했었습니다. 그래서 이런 시스템을 만드는데 목표는 에이전트는 도시 시민이고요. 세종시에 한 40만 넘는 시민들을 모두 다 만들어내기로 했고요. 그리고 시뮬레이션은 1분 단위로 다 하도록 했습니다. 그래서 실제 데이터들을 넣으려고 했는데요. 그래도 좀 저희가 구분을 좀 해야 해서 그 지리 정보 인프라에 해당하는 데이터들을 일단 이렇게 만들었는데 주로 아시겠지만 지역 정보, 시장 정보, 길, 도로 정보 이런 것들이 들어가겠고요. 그다음에 facility 인프라라고 해서 주로 보면은 차량을 이용하신다든지 아니면 건축물이라든지 이런 것들을 다 이런 데이터로 구분을 했습니다. 이거는 이제 저희가 구분을 한 거고요. 그리고 이제 중요한 게 시민들이니까 시민들의 직업은 뭔지, 나이는 어떻게 되는지, 연령은 어떻게 되는지, 수입은 뭔지 그런 것들을 좀 다 표현을 하려고 했고요. 그러면 이 사람들이 어떻게 행위할 거냐, 에이전트 베이스 모델에서 굉장히 중요한 게 이런 부분들이라서 사실 이런 부분들을 식별하고 매핑하는 게 굉장히 어려웠는데 저희는 활용하는 게 결국에는 통계청에서 나오는 MDIS 데이터나 이런 그리고 트래픽 데이터나 생활 통계 시간 데이터들을 활용을 했습니다. 그리고 주민등록 요약 DB를 사용해서 아마 저희가 알기로는 대한민국에서는 저희가 그 주민등록 요약 데이터를 사용한 첫 연구 사례라고 저희는 알고 있는데요. 이유는 이 데이터를 사용하려고 그러면은 국가의 부처인 행정안전부의 도움을 받아야 되는데 저희가 처음 도움을 받은 사례라고 하더라고요. 그래서 이런 데이터들을 모아서 카드사 데이터, 이동통신사 데이터 이런 것들은 기본적으로 다 활용을 하고 또 이용 못하는 것들도 있었는데요. 이렇게 결합을 하면 이렇게 될 수 있을 거라고 기대했습니다. 그래서 지역이 있고 이동수단들이 있고 그리고 사람들이 있는데 어디로 왜 가는지를 한 번에 데이터를 모아서 표현할 수 있을 거라고 기대를 한 겁니다. 그래서 각 분야에 대해서 표현을 하게 되면 어떤 변화를 주면 만약에 도로 네트워크가 바뀌고 다리가 하나 더 생기면 사람들이 어떻게 변화하는지를 알고 싶었던 게 저희의 목표가 되겠습니다. 조금만 더 설명을 드리면 이 데이터에서 좀 표현이 되는데요. 저희가 활용한 더 살펴봤던 데이터도 굉장히 많고 국가적인 데이터도 있고 민간 데이터도 있고 제가 돈 주고 산 데이터도 많고 또 버린 데이터도 되게 많습니다. 또 합치려고 했더니 합쳐지도 않은 데이터도 너무 많았는데요. 그래서 활용하는 데이터 중에서 좀 몇몇 주요한 데이터들만 먼저 말씀을 드립니다. 그래서 아까 얘기 드렸던 이제 지리 정보 인프라에서는 기본적으로 세종시를 대상으로 하는데 항상 분석을 하려면 분석 단위가 가장 중요하니까요. 분석 단위는 저희가 700개의 존으로 구분을 했는데 이 존은 대한민국에 얻을 수 있는 가장 작은 데이터라고 생각하고 있는 통계청의 집계구 데이터를 사용하기로 했습니다. 그래서 통계청의 집계구 데이터는 통상적으로 똑같지는 않지만 500에서 1000명 정도 규모를 하나의 집객으로 표현을 합니다. 그래서 사람이 좀 밀집해 있는 곳은 좀 좁게 표현이 되고 사람이 좀 밀집하지 않은 곳은 굉장히 넓게 표현이 됩니다. 그래서 세종시를 이렇게 표현을 하게 되고 그리고 세종시에서만 이동이 있는 게 아니라 세종시하고 서울도 이동이 있고 대전도 이동이 있기 때문에 그런 쪽은 좀 간단하게 처리를 해서 이렇게 전체적으로 합치게 되면은 700개로 표현을 하게 되었습니다. 그리고 뭐 잘 아시겠지만 도로 네트워크는 7,879개 이제 교통부에서 제시하고 있는 그런 데이터들을 활용했고요. 3,090개 이상의 교차로를 다 집어넣고 그다음에 세종시가 아직 완성은 안 돼 있는데 5지구, 6지구도 육생활권도 포함되어 있는데 이런 부분들도 다 포함을 해서 집어넣습니다. 그리고 퍼실리티 데이터라고 해서 지금 빌딩 정보를 다 포함을 했는데요. 이게 중요한 거는 이거 넣을 때 굉장히 어려웠었습니다. 저희 국토부에서 주고 계시는 36,313개 뭐 빌딩 얘기를 들었는데 저희가 이 속에는 사람이 어디에서 왜 가는지에 대한 목적 통행이 국토나 교통 연구하는 분들은 굉장히 중요하다고 얘기를 하시더라고요. 저는 원래 그런 걸 잘 몰랐는데 그래서 그런 걸 만들려면 어떤 일을 해야 되냐면 건물 속에 어떤 상권이 있는지도 다 집어넣어야 되더라고요. 본죽, 아이스크림집, 그리고 사업체들도 되게 중요합니다. 그래서 통계청의 전국 사업체 조사, 왜냐하면 직장인이 가는 곳이 다 표현이 돼야 되거든요. 당연히 정부 세정청사 다 표현이 돼야 되고요. 그런 표현을 하는데 정말 너무너무 힘들었습니다. 그래서 이런 표현들 다 해야 되고 그리고 이런 곳으로 무엇을 타고를 갈 것인지를 다 표현을 했고요. 버스 노선 이런 것들도 실제로 데이터화되어 있지 않습니다. 저희가 다 데이터화했고요. 그 다음에 차량 정보, 그 다음에 자전거 정보 다 표현한 걸 Facility Infra라고 했습니다. 그리고 이제 사람 정보를 표현하게 되는데요. 저희가 데이터를 만들 때 세종시는 약 38만 명 정도 되었습니다. 그래서 38만 명을 포함을 하고요. 그리고 44만 명이 된 이유는 세종시의 1단위를 이렇게 출입하고 유출입 인구가 약 8만 명이 되었습니다. 그래서 모두를 합치니까 44만 명이 되고 하루에 뭐 0시부터 시작해서 밤 12시까지 이 사람들의 유출입을 모두 다 살펴보는 게 되겠고요. 그리고 이동의 가장 중요한 것은 성별과 연령과 직업으로 보았습니다. 이거는 뭐 제가 했다기보다 연구자들과 타 분야의 전문가들과 협의를 한 거고요. 그래서 세종시에는 9가지 직업이 나오는데 이것도 굉장히 어려웠는데 만약에 서울시를 대상으로 직업이나 이런 걸 도출하게 되면 9가지가 아닐 수 있습니다. 그래서 우리나라에도 정확하게 분류된 직업 데이터가 굉장히 다양합니다. 좀 표준화가 되면 좋을 것 같기는 한데요. 세종시를 대상으로 하다 보니 그 직업 데이터를 만들다 보니까 다 없어지는 데이터가 너무 많습니다. 그래서 유의미한 데이터를 만들려다 보니 9개 정도가 나옵니다. 공무원, 학생, 이런 데이터가 나오게 되고요. 그리고 이 직업들은 MDIS의 통계청 데이터를 보면 10% 데이터가 있는데 그 데이터를 비율적으로 확대해서 재생산해서 사용을 했습니다. 그리고 로케이션은 이제 그 주민등록 요약 DB를 사용했는데요. 38만 명에 해당하는 세종시의 그 주민등록 요약 DB는 소중한 데이터인 것이 사람들이 어디에 있는지를 처음 초기 데이터를 만들어낼 수가 있습니다. 그래서 이 데이터는 동 근처 정도까지 저희가 아파트 동단위 정도 근처까지 만들어낼 수가 있어서 어디 있는지 대신 비식발화되어 있고요. 그렇게 데이터를 만들어냈고요. 그리고 이제 근처에 있는 대전시나 청주시나 이런 데이터들도 주민등록 요약 DB를 사용하면 좋지만 거기까지는 협조를 못 받아서 이거는 통신사 데이터를 활용해서 저희가 데이터를 다 만들어내었습니다. 그렇게 해서 에이전트를 구성을 했고요. 그리고 결국에는 이동을 어떻게 하고 행위를 알아야 되는데 행위 데이터를 만드는 방법은 통계청에 5년마다 한 번씩 만들어내는 굉장히 큰 데이터인 생활시간 조사 데이터를 활용을 했습니다. 생활시간 조사는 통계청에서 국가 데이터로 만들고 있는 것으로서 주로 한 200개 정도의 행위를 만들어냅니다. 예를 들어 중학생 남자가 일주일 동안 생활을 하면서 조사표, 설문조사표에다가 그런 걸 넣는데요. 나 학교를 갔다가 그다음에 하교를 해서 학원을 갔다가 PC방을 갔다가 이런 것들이 10분 단위로 다 표현을 하도록 되어 있습니다. 그래서 이 데이터를 되게 소중하다고 보고 활용하기로 했고, 그래서 한 150에서 200가지 정도의 행위가 나오지만 세종시에다 그걸 또 입히려다 보니 데이터들이 남아나지는 않았습니다. 그래서 그 중에서 한 10개 정도의 데이터들만 남길 수밖에 없었습니다. 뭐 학교를 등교하거나 직장으로 출근하거나 밥 먹거나 레저 활동하거나 이런 정도만 남았습니다. 물론 이런 데이터도 서울시에다 대입을 하면 또 달라지고 더 많은 행위가 나올 수도 있습니다. 그러나 이렇게 지금 데이터의 유의미성을 가지고 이렇게 만들어냈고요. 그리고 이제 이동할 때 데이터를 만드는 것들은 이제 모델을 좀 사용했는데요. 뭐 각각의 여러 가지 뭐 통기사 OD 데이터도 활용을 했지만 교통 전문가들께서 많이 활용하고 계시는 전통적인 그래비티 모델 또는 프라타 모델을 상황에 맞도록 사용을 했습니다. 그래서 이게 이제 전반적으로 저희가 모델을 만들어 구성한 거고요. 그리고 이 모델을 전부 다 가지고서 시뮬레이터에 집어넣은 거는 데이터량이 많고 그래서 저희가 리패스트 HPC 버전을 가져다가 이제 병렬 컴퓨팅이 가능하도록 다 만들었습니다. 그래서 전에 리패스트 HPC의 심포니 버전이 있는데 그게 자바로 돼 있는데 그 자바로 버전을 돌렸더니 이게 에이전트가 죽어서 이게 쓸 수가 없었습니다. 그래서 저희가 C++로 다 수정을 해서 그 다음에 이 지역에 대한 그 레이어드 아키텍처를 지금 하나씩 다 집어넣어서 시뮬레이터를 구성을 했습니다. 네, 이게 지금 동영상인데요. 기술적인 문제로 안 보이더라고요. 죄송하지만 저한테 연락을 주시거나 하면 누구든지 다 전달해 드리도록 하겠습니다. 별건 없지만 돌아간다는 걸 보여드리려고 했고요. 그래서 결과를 보여드리면 시뮬레이션 모델을 만드는 거는 굉장히 어렵고 연구진이 밸리데이션을 해야 되지만 이거 시뮬레이션 모델만 만들어내면 결과는 마음대로 뽑아낼 수 있습니다. 원래 그래서 이렇게 하는 거고요. 예를 들어 에이전트 하나만 딱 뽑아내면 30살 남자가 어디에서 무슨 이 사람 직업은 뭐고 시간대별로 뭘 하는지를 한 번씩 다 볼 수 있고 통계적인 데이터를 원하는 대로 다 볼 수 있습니다. 즉 예를 들어 이제 어떤 지역의 시간대별로 사람들이 어떻게 있는지를 볼 때 주민등록 DB하고 실제 존재하는 거하고 좀 차이가 있을 수도 있거든요. 그런 데이터들도 다 확인이 가능합니다. 그래서 이렇게 확인 가능하고 그리고 검증은 밸리데이션은 이제 저희가 실제로 이제 결국에는 밸리데이션이 ABM을 했었을 때 어려운 거는 검증인데요. 저희가 이렇게 검증을 해봤습니다. 모든 걸 다 검증을 할 수는 없고 저 버스 카드 데이터랑 VDS 데이터를 사용했습니다. 그래서 버스 카드 데이터는 하루 정도를 잡아가지고 세종시하고 대전시 이동하는 버스가 있어요. 그래서 버스를 상행선, 하행선을 다 보고서 시간대별로 이동하는 사람이 다 숫자가 맞는지를 검증을 해봤습니다. 해봤더니 약 80% 정도 나오고요. VDS 데이터도 썼는데요. VDS는 아시겠지만 그 도로가에 세워져 있는 카메라 같은 건데 카메라에서 차량을 보면서 이게 카운트하는 겁니다. 그래서 시간대별로 다 상하행선을 카운트를 하는 건데 그 카운트를 해봤더니 이제 거의 한 80% 정도 수준인데 이후로도 저희가 시간을 반영하는 모델도 다 반영을 해서 약 85에서 90% 정도의 좀 더 밸리데이션 좀 더 우수한 결과가 좀 나왔는데요. 일단 뭐 그냥 연구니까 그렇습니다. 자, 그래서 어디다 써먹었느냐? 저희는 사실 연구자라서 사실 이런 거 아까 방금 지금까지 말씀드린 게 이렇게 시뮬레이터를 만드는 데 집중을 했는데요. 공무원들께서는 이거 만들어도 그게 무슨 의미인지 잘 모르시더라고요. 그래서 제가 어떻게 했냐면 그럼 어디든지 써달라고 하시길래 저희가 했던 게 그 세종시하고 대전시하고 광역급행 서울은 M버스가 많으시는데요. 광역급행 버스 노선을 만드는데 버스 노선 만드는 게 사실 간단한 문제가 아닙니다. 그 문제에 한번 활용을 해보려고 했었고요. 그 다음에 다리를 놓을 때 어디다 놓는 게 좋을지 이런 것들에 대해서 좀 얘기를 해봤고요. 그 다음에 자전거를 어떻게 효율적으로 활용할 건지에 대해서 한번 적용을 해봤습니다. 그 외에도 좀 많이 있습니다만 오늘은 그렇게만 말씀드리고 마무리할까 합니다. 그래서 처음에 말씀드릴 게 세종시와 대전 간의 버스 노선을 새로 만들 때 한 방법인데요. 기존에 있는 버스 노선을 다 만들어내고 그 다음에 세종시에서 제한하시는 버스 노선은 몇 개를 다 이것보다 더 있었는데 다 집어넣고 돌렸습니다. 그래서 중요한 부분은 현재 가지고 있는 세종시의 버스 노선에서 새롭게 제한하는 후보 노선도 하고 이러면 어떤 문제가 생기냐면 후보 노선을 이용하게 되면 기존의 버스 노선을 이용하지 않는 효과가 생길 수 있습니다. 그러니까 새로운 노선이 생긴다고 해서 모든 게 상생 협력이 되면 좋지만 그게 아니라 서로 경쟁 관계가 생길 수도 있습니다. 그래서 가장 합리적인 방법을 찾아내는 문제가 매우 어려운 문제가 되겠습니다. 그래서 가장 합리적으로 사람들이 탈 수 있는 버스 노선을 찾아내는 그런 방법을 찾았고요. 그래서 지금 이렇게 뭐 한 2개 정도를 선택해서 세종시에서 이 노선을 좀 찾아서 결국엔 버스 노선을 만들려고 그러면은 우리나라에서는 지금 국토교통부 정부 산하의 대도시권 광역교통위원회라고 있어서 거기에 자료를 제출하고 과학적인 자료를 제출하고 승인을 받아야 되는데 이게 지금 승인을 받고 아마 지금 버스 노선 사업자를 선정하려고 하는 그런 단계에 있는 걸로 있고 거기에 좀 기술이 활용이 되었다라고 보시면 좋습니다. 근데 아쉬움은 사실 제가 요 단계에서 좀 저는 소프트웨어를 전공해서 이 후보 노선도 자동으로 AI를 써서 뽑아내고 싶었습니다, 사실. 근데 그렇게까지는 하기가 어려웠던 게 버스 노선을 만들어내는 기준들을 또 만들어내야 되는데 그게 너무 어려웠습니다. 그래서 현재는 그렇게 못했고 세종시에서 제안해주는 여러 복수의 노선 중에서 그 중에서 가장 합리적인 노선을 찾아드리는 그런데 ABM을 사용했다. 이런 정도 이해해 주시면 될 것 같습니다. 그리고 두 번째로 사용 사례는 세종시에서 이렇게 버스 지금 다리가 있는데요. 이 다리가 통상적으로는 별로 안 막히는데 출퇴근 시간엔 그렇게 막혀서 다리를 좀 더 놓자라는 얘기가 있었습니다. 그래서 시나리오는 가까운 데 다리를 놓을지 아니면 조금 더 먼 게 놓을지 아니면 이 다리가 인도랑 같이 되어 있는 차도랑 인도랑 같이 있는 다리인데 인도를 조금 없애고 차도를 좀 확장하는 게 좋을지 이 3가지 시나리오를 찾아봤거든요. 이때도 ABM 에이전트 베이스드 모델이 좀 유효했었습니다. 그래서 이걸 썼더니 여러 가지 시나리오가 있는데 결국에는 원하는 게 교통량이 분산되는 방향을 찾아서 다리를 놓는 게 좋겠다라고 알려드렸고요. 그거는 지금 첫 번째 시나리오였습니다. 그래서 가장 가까운 시나리오였습니다. 이런 식으로 뭐 상황에 따라 다를 수 있지만 ABM을 이럴 때도 사용할 수 있다. 이렇게 말씀드릴 수 있겠습니다. 마지막으로 저희가 세종시에 어울링이라는 자전거를 이용하는 데 좀 도움을 드렸습니다. 앞에서도 자전거 관련해서는 한 2분 정도 이용하셨었는데요. 이게 좀 관심사긴 합니다. 그리고 문제가 조금 더 좁혀져 있는 것 같아서 좀 접근하기는 좀 좋았던 것 같습니다. 세종시의 지금 자전거에 대한 부분은 여기가 정부 청사고 그 다음에 주변에 이제 주택가로 이렇게 구성이 됩니다. 그리고 자전거 대수는 세종시는 저희가 기술을 개발할 때는 연구할 때는 2,500대 정도 자전거가 있었고요. 그리고 자전거를 거치하는 곳이 있습니다. 스테이션이라고 거치하는 곳은 약 570여 곳이 있습니다. 그런데 이제 문제의 핵심으로 본 부분은 그러면 시간대별로 자전거를 그 거치소에 n분의 1 해서 4대씩 딱딱딱딱 배치하는 것이 최적의 방법인가? 라고 생각을 하게 된 거죠. 그래서 시간대별로는 다를 수 있습니다. 왜 그러냐면 주택가에서 아침에는 이쪽에 많이 배치가 되어야 직장으로 이제 타고 가실 거거든요. 그리고 퇴근하실 때에는 또 좀 이렇게 뭐 점심시간에는 또 점심 식사를 하시러 또 타고 이동하시더라고요. 그래서 조금 이제 꼬이게 되는, 복잡도가 높아지게 되는데, 그러다가 또 이제 뭐 회식하러 가셨다가 또 어떤 분은 또 이제 자전거를 타고 옮기시는데, 세종시에 유효한 재배치 어떤 자원이 5대의 재배치 차량이 있습니다. 그래서 차량 5대를 어떻게 효율적으로 이용할 것인가의 문제입니다. 그래서 그때에도 저희가 지금 ABM이랑 머신러닝 기법을 같이 활용을 해드렸는데, 그래서 그 기능을 이용해서 시간대마다 각 577곳에 있는 거치소에 몇 대의 자전거가 있는 게 가장 바람직한지를 추천해드리는 그런 기능을 만드는데 도움을 드렸고, 그거는 ABM하고 머신러닝을 좀 같이 썼습니다. 자, 결론인데요. 퓨처 디렉션인데요. 이렇게 저희는 좀 하고 싶은데 연구가 끝나서 지금 기회가 좀 없는 상황인데요. 저희가 일을 하다 보니 원래 여기 계신 분들께서는 이제 뭐 지리 정보나 정책을 하시다 보니 그 자체에 대한 관심도 많으시겠지만, 저희는 그런 것뿐만 아니라 그런 연구자들의 연구를 모아서 이렇게 대한민국에 보면 그 공공의 데이터들이 있습니다. 그리고 민간의 데이터도 필요하면 또 인풋으로 넣을 수 있고요. 그래서 이 데이터가 시기는 딱 맞지 않지만 주기적으로 생산이 됩니다. 그러면 이 생산되는 데이터를 저희는 할 수 있다고 생각하는데 피드백을 계속 주는 겁니다. 저장소로. 피드백을 주고 이 피드백 받은 게 저희 모형과 어우러지면 이 모형이 자동으로 캘리브레이션 하고 싶었습니다. 그래서 저희는 그걸 할 수 있다고 생각했고요. 왜 그러냐면 저희가 뭐 한 1, 2년 전에 모델을 만들면 이 모델이 시간이 흐르면 점점 현실과 격차가 생긴다는 것을 알게 됐습니다. 그래서 이것들도 좀 정합할 수 있는 방법도 역시 데이터고, 그 데이터를 이용해서 계속 쓸 수 있는 시스템을 만들고 싶었으나 데이터를 활용하기 위해서는 제공자가 좀 허락을 받기 어려운 점, 그다음에 시차가 생기는 점, 여러 가지 이슈들이 많이 있어서 그런 문제들을 저희는 연구 기간 내에는 극복하지는 못했던 것 같습니다. 앞으로 이런 일이 좀 극복이 될 수 있도록 많은 데이터를 가진 기관과 연구자들이 협력을 했으면 좋겠습니다. 그래서 그런 게 잘 만들어지면 결국에는 공무원분들께서는 그거를 보시기만 하면 되거든요. 보시면서 그냥 정책에 적용하시면 되기 때문에 그런 방향으로 좀 시스템을 좀 만들어가는, 그런데 좀 기여를 할 수 있는 방법이 있으면 좋겠습니다. 그래서 오늘 제가 준비한 거는 여기까지입니다. 발표 들어줘서 감사합니다. 이상입니다.
Thank you, Dr. Jung, for the detailed presentation. Our last speaker is Dr. Sewon Lee. Today, he will present the most recent research, which is the future of urban AI implementations and challenges. Dr. Lee leads research on the convergence of urban planning and geospatial. After his PhD in urban planning, he conducted research on geospatial technology and policy at Spatial Information Research Institute in Korea Land and Geospatial Informatics Corporation. We call it LX. From 2015 to 2021. He has been researching on urban AI, metaverse cities, and urban tech at KRIHS since 2022. Please welcome Dr. Lee.
Please keep your transfer. Yeah, thank you. 발표를 하도록 하겠습니다. 발표 목적은 제가 한 연구 내용을 알려드리는 것보다는 이후에 있을 토론회 아젠다 주제들을 좀 띄우고, 그리고 최근에 도시와 AI라는 주제에 대해서 좀 정책적인 방향에 대한 언급을 하는 발표를 좀 말씀드리겠습니다. 시간 관계상 제가 10분 내로 요약해서 좀 빠르게 넘어가도록 하겠습니다. 준비한 순서는 첫 번째는 도시와 기술에 대한 오늘 발표해 주신 순서들을 들어보면 굉장히 좋은 사례들이 발표됐었고요. 그런 유즈 케이스와 펄리시들을 찾아봤고 이거를 우리가 한국 사회에서 실현하고 하려면 뭐가 필요한가라는 것들을 짚어보는 과제들이라고 생각하시면 될 것 같습니다. 자세한 설명을 생략하면 AI가 가져다주는 그 미래 산업 시장에 대한 전망치는 굉장히 과대 추정이 되고 있을 만큼 굉장히 크게 되어 있죠. 근데 그 중에서도 한 가지 제가 살펴본 거는 노동 생산성에 대한 효과입니다. 과거에 우리가 스팀 엔진이라고 부르는 증기기관이 가져다준 노동 생산성의 변화, 이후에 인더스트리얼, 그 다음에 IT, 그리고 AI까지 최근에 이제 진단 나오는 것들 중에 하나는 IT가 가져다줬던 노동 생산성의 변화가 AI가 가져다주는 노동 생산성이 2배 이상이 될 거라는 전망치가 있죠. 저것도 과대 추정되었다라는 표현들 굉장히 많았는데 생성 AI, 제너레이티브 AI가 등장하고 난 이후부터 유즈 케이스만 모아도 실제로 2.6 빌리언 달러 그리고 4.4 빌리언 달러가 되고 그 이상으로 그 직업군들에 미치는 이들이 이제 AI라는 그 모델을 사용하게 되면서 생겨나는 노동 생산성은 가히 역대 없었던 전례가 없었던 사례로 추정될 만큼 많은 변화를 가지고 있을 거라고 예상이 되고 있습니다. 제가 주목하고 있는 점들은 이런 기술이 도시에 어떤 변화를 주는가. 실제로 UN 해비타트의 내용이기도 하지만 도시라는 거는 이미 기술 위에서 운영이 되고 있고 작동이 되고 있기 때문에 기술이 작동되고 있지 않은 도시는 unsustainable하다라는 게 가장 기본적인 논점입니다. 과거에 우리가 뉴 어버니즘이라는 얘기가 나온 거는 미국에서 인더스트리얼 머신하고 자동차들이 활성화되다 보니까 도시가 스프롤하게 쫙 펼치게 되고 그렇다 보니까 뉴 어바니즘이라는 것들이 지금 현재 도시계획의 주류 담론을 차지하고 있는 컴팩트 시티와 생활권 계획 이런 것들이 저기서 나오기 시작을 했고요. 그리고 IT 테크라고 부르는 IT 기술들이 1995년도부터 2000년대 중반까지 휩쓸면서 한국에서 또 전 세계적으로 유비쿼터 시티와 스마트 시티가 굉장히 주목을 받습니다. 그렇다라고 한다면 이런 생산성의 변화를 가져온 우리 삶의 변화를 책임지고 있는 이 AI 테크, AI 기술은 지금 우리 도시와 또 AI 어바니즘이라고 하는 저런 용어들이 지금 현재 최근에 저널들에 굉장히 많이 나오고 있고 그럼 시티 레벨들에서 어떤 변화를 줄 수 있을 것인가 라는 것이 하나의 저의 주제이자 관심도라고 볼 수 있겠습니다. 일단 미국의 AI 국방과학위원회죠. AI 위원회에서 발표한 리포트가 NSCAI인데 AI 리포트를 발표합니다. 현재 AI 기술이 가장 임팩트 있게 들어갈 수 있는 키 에리어가 뭐냐라고 봤을 때 첫 번째는 프레딕션. 모두 우리가 지금 공간정보와 도시계획 분야에서 하고 있는 영역들입니다. NLL 모델만 뺀다면 사실 프레딕션과 플래닝에 대한 내용, 도시계획과 트랜스포테이션, 그리고 모델링과 시뮬레이션 해주신 것들, 그 외에 이제 자율주행차와 같이 로보틱스, 그 다음에 컴퓨터 비전까지 이러한 부분들에서 언급되고 있는데 오늘 발표해 주신 내용들에서도 제목들이 키워드가 다 얼반과 다 AI가 같이 가고 있습니다. 그래서 제가 궁금한 것들은 왜 AI라는 기술을 얘기하는데 시티를 얘기하고 있는가? 왜 어반을 같이 얘기하고 있는가라는 것들에 대한 궁금증이 있었고요. 그 사이드워크 랩스에서 2019년도에 어반 데이터라는 기준을 그 데이터에 대한 개념을 들고서 토론토의 그 워크프론트 개발을 시작을 합니다. 그때 나왔던 얘기가 구글이 물론 사이드워크 랩스는 구글의 자회사로 실제 스마트 시티 쪽에서는 실제 어반 데이터를 실행을 하려고 했던 사례죠. 구글이 인터넷에서 데이터를 취득하면서 검색 엔진이나 AI 플랫폼을 만들듯이 사이드워크 랩스에서는 시도했던 거는 저 어반 데이터를 가지고서 어반 AI 플랫폼이나 어떤 시티 레벨의 이런 브레인을 구축하고 싶어하는 그런 욕망을 좀 갖고 있습니다. 근데 2019년도에 시민단체와 붙으면서 어반 데이터라는 명목이 이제 다 사라진 물리적 개발만 사실 부딪히게 되죠. 그러면서 등장한 것들이 Responsible AI에 대한 내용들이고요. 그렇게 두각이 되면서 가장 첫 번째 논의가 됐던 것들이 바로 저 어반 데이터의 중요성입니다. 그거를 이제 저만 고민한 것들은 아니고 첫 번째로 어반 AI라는 타이틀을 들고 나왔던 거는 소르본 대학의 ETRI 체어입니다. 그래서 카를로 모레노 15분 도시라고 발표했던 그 랩에서 나왔던 그 휘버트 브로시라는 이 친구인데요. 이분이 어반 AI는 스마트 시티와 AI의 크로스로드다. 스마트 시티는 도시를 스마트하게 하고 있지만 그게 진짜 스마트하게 서스테이너블한 시티를 향해서 나아가고 있느냐라는 질문을 던지면서 우리가 시 정부가 AI를 도입하고 AI를 통해서 도시를 변화시키려고 할 때 어떤 가이드를 줄 수 있느냐에 대한 답을 찾으려고 시작을 했었고 그때 이제 처음에 두 가지의 그 큰 차이를 듭니다. 온톨로지와 로보틱스. 그래서 어반 AI로 나가는 데 있어서 저 두 가지 컨텐츠가 굉장히 필요하다. 자세한 내용들은 이 어반 AI 보고서를 좀 참고해 주시기 바라고요. 어너토미를 밝히고 있는데 어반 AI라는 걸 구현하기 위해서는 도시에 이제 인프라가 있듯이 인프라가 데이터, 센서 데이터로 취합되고 그것들이 이제 AI의 모델링을 거쳐서 디시전 메이킹까지 갈 수 있는 이런 어너토미가 구조가 구성이 되어야 된다. 그런 논의들이 있었고 한 가지 더는 UN 헤비타트와 그다음에 조슈아 벤지오 교수가 뭐 AI 아버지라고도 불리고 있죠. 그분이 이제 최근에 AI와 시티즈라는 보고서를 발표합니다. 저 안에서 이 기존의 도시, 이 기존의 뭐 전문 영역들이 갖고 있는 심볼릭한 AI가 있는 반면에 스태틱한 AI가 존재하고 특히 이제 도시와 AI가 만나면서 하이브리드 AI의 중요성이 굉장히 부각되고 있다. 이것들을 어떻게 해석하느냐 또는 인터섹션을 갖고 가느냐에 대한 부분들에 대해서 굉장히 앞으로는 중요해질 것이다 라는 인사이트를 좀 주고 있습니다. 그와 함께 경쟁적으로 2017년도에 18년도에 AI 전략 계획들을 전 세계가 경쟁적으로 수립을 합니다. 물론 이제 우리나라도 굉장히 첫 번째 2018년도에 수립을 했죠. 국가별로 차이가 있긴 있습니다만 캐나다에서는 가장 먼저 도입을 하기도 했고 조슈아 벤지아오가 같은 그런 그 AI 연구와 리서치 인스티튜트를 커뮤니티를 가지고서 AI 전략 계획들을 수립을 하고 미국 같은 경우는 기술을 우위를 점유하게 한 것 위한 목적 한 가지와 그다음 국방적인 목적을 두 가지를 중요시하고 있습니다. 그리고 런던 같은 경우에는 철저하게 영국 같은 경우에는 산업을 AI 산업을 활성화시키기 위해서 테크네이션을 중요하게 생각하고 있죠. 한국도 2019년도에 수립하긴 했지만 이후에 실질적으로 가져온 AI의 정책이나 현황에 대해서 변화는 크지 않습니다. 그러한 사유들은 뭐 여러 가지를 들 수 있겠지만 그 중에서도 이 스마트 시티라고 하는 한국에서 이 종합 플랜 지자체들 중에서도 다 세우고 있는 저 플랜 안에서 하나의 기술로서 언급되는 거에 멈춰 좀 있는 것들이 좀 현실이죠. 제가 서울은 굉장히 뭐 한국 안에서는 선도적인 도시이기 때문에 이러한 문제에 좀 직면해 있습니다. 최근에 발표한 서울 플랜 안에는 양재 AI 허브를 포함해서 지금 R&D를 수행하고 있는데 도시 계획을 빅데이터와 AI로 수립하려는 시도를 하고 있죠. 그러한 내용들이 사실 서울 플랜에 일부 반영이 되어 있습니다. 근데 마찬가지로 서울 안에서는 스마트 시티 플랜을 하고 있습니다. 스마트 시티 플랜의 목적은 어반 매니지먼트와 오퍼레이션을 하겠다는 얘기죠. AI로. 올해 2011월에 이제 뭐 수립을 하겠다라고 발표만 하고 있습니다. 서울 AI 스트래티지 플랜이죠. 과거 국가 수준에서 AI 플랜을 수립했다면 이제는 도시 레벨에서도 AI 스트래티지 플랜을 하고 있는 거죠. 그러면서 AI 서비스 모델들을 발굴하고 있습니다. 물론 이제 발굴하고 있는 것들 중에 대다수는 이제 스마트 시티에서 AI와 관련된 사업들이 그냥 넘어온 수준인데 과연 도시 수준에서 시티 레벨에서 AI 스트래티지 뭐 전략 계획을 수립해 나갈 것인가 이거를 지금 고민해 봐야 할 때가 아닌가라는 좀 생각을 해봤고요. 그런 차원에서 뉴욕의 사례는 굉장히 큰 인사이트를 줍니다. 뉴욕의 CTO이자 뭐 폴 로먼이라고 하는 분이 AI 스트래티지 플랜을 작성을 하면서 전문가들과 시민들과 각 처에 이제 있는 그 분들과 다 대담을 끝낸 이후에 5가지의 전략 방향을 세웁니다. 첫 번째 중요한 건 어반 데이터다. 두 번째는 어플리케이션이다. 거버넌스, 그다음에 파트너십, 이쿼티. 이 5가지에 대한 전략을 수립합니다. 그러면서 뉴욕 정부와 이하에 있는 기관들에 대해서 모든 기관들이 들고 있는 데이터와 얘네들이 할 수 있는 것들이 뭔지 다 매칭을 시키고 이와 함께 오픈 데이터 전략 계획을 수립하면서 뉴욕은 도시에서 얼반 데이터라고 하는 AI를 돌릴 수 있는 머신 리더블한 데이터의 데이터 셋들을 만들어내기 시작합니다. 우리가 갖고 있는 토지 대장, 주택 대장에 대한 데이터들은 행정 관리를 하기 위한 데이터들이지 AI를 돌리기 위한 데이터는 아니거든요. 그 작업들이 필요했다는 것이죠. 그래서 첫 번째 어반 데이터에 대한 중요성을 언급하기 시작했고요. 유즈 케이스들에 대한 것들은 좀 넘어가도록 하겠습니다. 저렇게 한 50여 가지, 많게는 제가 한 100여 가지까지 사례들을 살펴봤는데, 그럼 기존의 스마트 시티나 도시 수준에서 하고 있었던 기술들과 어떤 차이들이 있는지 콘텐츠들을 좀 살펴보려고 했었고요. 첫 번째로 드러난 콘텐츠에서는 옵티마이즈를 추구한다는 겁니다. 그리고 두 번째는 기존에 데이터화되어 있지 않은 것들을 데이터화시키면서 이제 분석의 영역으로 바꾸고 있다. 온톨로지, 그 다음에 쉐어링하고 커넥팅하는 것들이 중요하고, 그 다음에 어그멘티드, 그 다음에 멀티유즈, 이 5가지 콘텐츠가 어반 AI와 관련된 키워드로 등장하고 있는 실제 유즈 케이스들이다라는 것들을 좀 정리를 해봤었고요. 그렇다고 한다면 저렇게 한 가지 분야가 아니라 시티 레벨에서 AI를 사용하려고 하는 유즈 케이스들은 뭐가 있느냐를 좀 한 발짝 더 나아가서 살펴봤었고요. 그런 차원에서 저런 사례들이 있었고, 그런 사례들에서 뭐가 중요한지 포인트들을 좀 살펴보니까 결국 저도 4가지 정도의 그 방향성을 좀 추릴 수 있었습니다. 한 가지는 이제 어반 데이터에 대한 중요성, 그 다음에 디지털 인프라, 그 다음에 AI 생태계, 그 다음에 거버넌스, 4가지 정도 차원에서 전략 계획들을 수립한다면 시티 레벨에서 꼭 필요하겠구나라는 방향성을 제시했고요. 어반 AI라는 거를 한국적 사회에서 좀 정의를 해보고 싶었습니다. 그래서 첫 번째로는 그냥 AI 앞에서 설명됐던 그런 그냥 AI 기술에 대한 언급을 넘어서 이게 도시라는 공간하고 만나다 보니까 도시가 갖고 있는 컴플렉시티라든가 폴리시 컨택트 이런 것들이 아우러지면서 굉장히 그 하이브리디티한 그런 영역들을 굉장히 요구하고 있구나. 그 정책적으로 봤을 때는 기존에 수립하던 이 AI 정책, 국가 단위의 AI 정책과 기존의 이제 어반 폴리시, 그래서 마스터 플랜이라든가 스마트 시티 플랜 같은 것들과의 접점의 어딘가에 어반 AI라는 것들이 존재하고 있구나라는 것들을 생각을 하게 됐고요. 앞서 그렇게 3분할돼서 기본 계획과 스마트 시티 계획과 AI 전략 계획이 중첩돼서 따로따로 수립되는 게 아니라 어느 정도 수준에서는 이제 그 AI를 받아들이고 계획을 수립하는 그 체계를 바꿔야 되지 않겠느냐. 그 바꾸는 데 있어서 크게 4가지 정도 요소를 고민할 필요가 있겠다라는 그런 개념을 갖고 좀 시작을 했습니다. 그렇다고 한다면 첫 번째로 어반 데이터라는 게 뭐냐. 과거에 이제 도시계획을 수립할 때 페이퍼에서 시작해서 지금은 이제 누구나 GIS를 사용하고 있고 지오데이터를 쓰고 있죠. 그래서 여기까지 오는 것도 힘든 과정들을 많이 겪었지만 결국 다음 단계로 우리가 AI를 도시에 적용하기 위해서는 머신 리더블한 데이터와 그것들을 읽어줄 수 있는 시스템화된 인프라가 필요하지 않겠느냐. 그게 이제 첫 번째인 거고요. 제가 건축물 대장을 얘기 드렸지만 건축물 대장은 사람이 건물을 신축하고 말소하고 하는 비헤이비어가 따라붙을 거고 그 행동을 따라서 결정된 이 사람들의 그 행동을 어떤 통제하기 위한 아니면은 그것들을 이제 데이터로 마련하기 위한 목적으로 수립이 된 거고 이것들을 뉴욕의 그 오픈 데이터 전략 계획과 같이 머신 리더블한 형태의 AI가 학습할 수 있는 데이터 형태로 바꿔야 될 것이고 이 바꾼 데이터들을 도시 수준에서 경기도와 서울에서는 그런 논의들을 하고 있는데 파운데이션 모델을 만들고 이걸 실제 적용하고 그것들이 법제도를 통해서 다시 그 문제가 있는 것들을 데이터를 사용한 리뷰어들의 의견을 반영해서 다시 정제되고 머신이 리더블할 수 있는 목적에 따라 이러한 형태의 시뮬레이션들을 우리가 받아줄 수 있느냐라는 것들이 첫 번째로 고민되어야 되는 것들이 아닌가. 그와 마찬가지로 데이터에서는 도시 데이터라고 한다면 필드에 따라 굉장히 다양할 거고 거기에 이제 데이터 소스와 형태, 데이터 타입, 그리고 프로세싱하는 처리, 그리고 그 데이터가 얼반 데이터라고 부를 수 있는 어떤 휴먼 센터 아니면은 객체 기반, 그다음에 환경 기반 이런 식의 데이터 얼반 데이터 셋이라고 하는 데이터셋들에 대한 AI가 머신 리더블 할 수 있는 데이터셋들에 대한 것들을 우리가 하나씩 지금이라도 정의를 해나가야 되는 것들이 아닌가. 그리고 이게 시티 레벨에서 할 수 있는 AI 전략 계획의 가장 첫 번째 목적이 되어야 되는 게 아닌가라는 생각을 했습니다. 두 번째는 이제 인프라에 대한 문제고요. 그것들이 이제 ETRI가 작성해 주셨던 AB의 모델의 그런 시스템일 수도 있고 AI 시스템일 수도 있고 이런 어반 AI에서 얘기하는 이게 체계일 수도 있고 알리바바가 들고 나온 모든 걸 다 해주려고 하는 플랫폼 형태의 브레인의 형태일 수도 있는 거고요. 그리고 뭐 벤지오 교수가 그 밀라를 창립하면서 몬트리올이 AI의 선도적인 도시와 국가로 발전하고 있는 것처럼 우리나라에도 2018년도에 AI 전략계획을 수립한 이후에 광주에다가 AI 클러스터를 만들겠다고 했는데 제가 AI 관련된 스타트업 기업 300개 정도를 지오코딩 해봤을 때 광주에는 한 3개 정도밖에 찍혀 있지 않고 서울에는 서울 경기 지역에 특히 이제 판교와 서초와 강남구 요 일대의 클러스터링을 약간 한 거 외에는 사실 클러스터링을 했다라고 보기는 어렵고요. 그렇다라고 한다면 AI 기업들이 자생하고 클러스터링을 하고 AI의 개발자들이 원하는 주거 환경과 공간이 어떤지 그분들이 어디에 집적해 있는지 이런 것들을 기초로 생태계를 만들어 가야 되지 않겠느냐라는 것들이 세 번째 과제일 수 있겠고요. 마지막으로 이제 네 번째 과제는 리스폰서블한 AI에 대한 AI를 그 공공정책에서 활용하기 위해서는 이 정도 한 세 가지 정도의 중요한 논점들이 있을 수 있겠다. 그래서 첫 번째는 기존의 이제 데이터를 취득하는 방식으로는 대응을 할 수가 없고 개인 데이터와 같이 데이터 트러스트, 데이터 뭐 코퍼레이션 이런 다양한 방법, 신탁과 같은 그런 방법들을 여러 가지를 사용해서 데이터가 유통될 수 있고 그게 이제 AI에 학습될 수 있는 그런 데이터셋으로 자리 잡는 것들이 첫 번째로 필요하겠고 두 번째는 이제 캐나다에서 알고리즘을 평가할 수 있는 평가 체계를 수립합니다. 이거 법적으로 제도적으로 갖고 있는데 우리나라는 과연 AI에 대한 알고리즘을 평가할 수 있는 평가 체계가 준비되어 있느냐 그거에 대한 문제가 필요한 것들이고 최근에 또 에틱스에 대한 문제들이 발생이 되고 있습니다. 현재 뭐 챗GPT를 포함해서 얘네들이 좌파적이냐 우파적이냐 어떤 거에 더 보수적이냐 진보적이냐 이런 문제에 대한 논의까지 있기 때문에 우리가 AI를 사용하기 위해 공공정책에서 사용하기 위해서는 이런 리스폰서블 AI에 대한 대안들이 지자체와 국가 수준에서 마련이 되어야 되겠다라는 차원에서 이렇게 해서 말씀드렸습니다. 이상으로 발표를 마치도록 하겠습니다. 감사합니다.
Thank you, Dr. Lee, for the inspiring presentation. We will have a short 5-minute coffee break and return to the discussion session at 4:30 p.m. Thank you. For the last session, we will have a panel discussion. Moderating this discussion is Professor Jeon. He is a professor at the University of Seoul. Now I'm going to turn the stage over to Professor Jeon.
Okay. First of all, can I ask some questions, little questions for all of them? First of all, Dr. Thill, I was very much impressed with your energy and enthusiasm with your very wonderful research and diverse topics, AI, including AI. You introduced a very interesting topic, the infectious disease, right? So you introduced, I have a couple of questions. You introduced some 3 different models. Okay, if you were predict, okay, spread of COVID, would you, which one would you select as best model? Maybe the most, the more working model. And second question is, you seem to have used county as a unit analysis unit. So as you understand, the size of Korea is much smaller than the county. The state in the United States, right? So people use a lot smaller units as research units in Korea, right? So that means, as you can understand, the popular problem called MAUP arises, right? Those smaller unit has too small to have certain meaning, certain relationships. So the second question is, would you be able to use your model in that smaller unit to predict the spread of the disease?
Right. All right, thank you very much for your questions. I think that, go ahead. I mean, those are very, very important questions. The very first one about which model would I use to predict? I mean, the third of the model, I mean, really because it's ABM, and indeed, ABM is really, those are very neat, really models for simulation and so on, but really one of the difficulties with ABM is really their validation. They tend to require very extensive data, as we saw in one of the presentations. So we did use very large data sets, but not quite as extensive as the presentation from our colleagues from ETRI. So that is definitely a big issue, and especially if you really want, during a pandemic, basically, you would need a tremendous amount of information to be able to provide data sort of on the fly, timely enough. I mean, you can't really run a model for 1 week to get predictions. You just can't. So I think at this point, probably agent-based models are probably out of the question in terms of really real-time prediction. In our case, this is really, I guess, in the future, if a pandemic of this nature were to happen, what could happen? How we would handle it? So one of the work that, one of the things that we hope to be able to do, and I didn't mention that about the third model that I talked about, really we hope to be able to evaluate some interventions. So how effective they would be if indeed there is a pandemic that develops in relation to or is spread really through micromobility systems. But otherwise, I would not really use it for prediction. This is really mainly to evaluate before the pandemic ex ante. The consequences of interventions and so on, for intervention design and so on. Of the other two, so certainly the AI methods have become extremely popular because indeed they can be extremely robust, so the compartmentalization models, which is essentially the family of the first one that I was talking about, even when you add the geography and the geospatial content to the full extent or to a greater extent, still have fundamentally some issues in terms of their design. And probably the future will be that there will be hybrid models that integrate really AI with those compartmentalization, compartment models, which would really work better. So there's a trend in that direction, so sort of hybrid models. So that's really what I would say. Your second question about aggregation is really very good. So yes, the county level data in the US were really very readily available. Data at the sub-county level data in terms of infection were much less readily available. They can be much less reliable. That goes back to data quality. Even in the county level, there's one thing that is really very interesting that you may ask, well, so why is it that you aggregate the data for 7 days, over a 7-day period? Well, government in the US, at least, government agencies really release the data on a daily basis, but if you look at because during the pandemic, at the counts as they were published, there were typically a major dip over the weekend and really on Monday that went up. That is definitely not a reflection of the behavior of the infection. It's just that really public administrators, the officials really did not necessarily work over the weekend. So it took a while basically for this information to be available, and all of a sudden the information hit the public domain on Monday, and that's why there was a bump on Monday. So there is that irregularity, which is really just based on the reporting of the information, and that's really why it's important to aggregate on a weekly basis. That is one thing, the temporal aggregation. The spatial aggregation is a little bit of the same as well. At least in the US, many people would not give their address or will give a different address or would lie about it. The county may already be beyond really what is fully reliable, right? So that is one thing. I think at some point I did receive some additional information really at the sub-county level, zip codes or something like that, I guess the sub-county level, which definitely would be better for prediction, for instance. There's no doubt about it, even in the US. But unfortunately, there's an issue of data availability that is not necessarily optimal, even in the US, and hopefully in some other countries it's more readily available. So it doesn't mean that really the public officials don't have the data, but they just don't want to make it public, and there's an issue of confidentiality. So whether it's public domain or even for sharing across agencies, often that is not the case. One of the secondary issues really tied to that MAUP issue you were dealing with, or you were talking about, is really that, I mean, infectious disease ultimately, even in the case of COVID, well, typically would be a fairly rare event. And rare events are very difficult to predict if you basically do it at the elemental level. So often aggregation really works better because you deal with a population or community, basically, so that the event is not quite as rare as it is otherwise. That is not necessarily dealing directly with the MAUP, which is there, but fundamentally we need to keep in mind as well that public officials are not necessarily that interested in knowing that you have been infected versus I have been infected, but we're all in the same room at the same time, and ultimately we all have been exposed to are part of the same community, or we live in the same neighborhood. So ultimately public officials are interested more about the community effect and the community interventions as opposed to intervention at the individual level, at least in the US. I know in some other countries they really want to know what every person does and so on. In the US, clearly, we also already noticed that during COVID, many people rebelled against the government and the big brother, basically, that tried to dictate what people were thinking or doing and whether they were wearing masks and so on. So I guess there was probably greater sensitivity with respect to that needs to be taken into account, at least in the US. That's a learning from that. Again, that does not necessarily solve the MAUP, but really is only so far we can go to control for it and to handle it in the proper way. Okay. Certainly we need to find really a balance there between the completely disaggregated and really very aggregated. And county is probably very broad. In the US, some counties may have LA County, Los Angeles County has a population of whatever, 8 million, right? So that is very large, way too large.
Thank you.
Which is probably the reasons you saw on the map that did show that really the ability of any of the models to predict infection really actually was very low because of the great population and great heterogeneity in that respect.
I'm sorry. I have to cut in.
Yes.
So, actually, I was not supposed to ask you around the speakers. As a panel, I'm supposed to mention my idea, but since I heard that we are a little behind the schedule, I have to cut. Sorry. So maybe I think I have to con my. Just a little talk.
제가 먼저 얘기하는 게 나을 것 같아요. 지금 다들 무슨 말씀을 하셔야 될지 되게 고민스러워하시는 것 같아서 이제 뭐 잘 보셨죠? 시뮬레이션, GeoAI 막 마구마구 발전하고 있어서 이제 우리도 이제 데이터를 기반으로 시뮬레이션에서 정책을 결정하자라는 게 사실은 이 세미나의 이제 어떤 기획 의도고요. 뭐 이걸 바탕으로 이제 앞으로 R&D도 필요할 거고, 뭐 다양한 이제 정책 과제도 필요한 것 같아서 그런 거를 이제 향후에 잘 추진해 나가자. 그런 걸 이제 좀 뭔가 뭐 공유도 하고 같이 앞으로 방향을 잡으려고 이제 이 세미나를 기획을 했던 거고요. 이제 제가 이제 발표하시는 분들 얘기를 들으면서 공통적으로 들었던 게 첫 번째, 데이터 문제는 다 말씀을 하시더라고요. 데이터 수집하기가 너무 어렵다. 가공하기 어렵다. 이제 그게 두 가지가 있는 것 같아요. 하나는 이 환경에 대한 데이터를 어떻게 만들 것이냐. 우리가 살아가는 환경이죠. 그 3D, 뭐 센싱 데이터, 또 사람들의 움직임 같은 소셜 센싱 데이터, 이런 데이터들을 다 결합을 해서 그걸 가지고 시뮬레이션도 하고 싶은데 이 데이터 자체가 너무 어렵다. 그래서 결국은 이제 뭐 우리가 국가 공간정보 정책을 하고 있는데 거기서 실현하고자 하는 게 디지털 트윈 대한민국이지 않습니까, 과장님? 그래서 이제 그런 것들을 사실은 그게 이제 중요해지는 거죠. 그것이 잘 돼야만 이제 시뮬레이션도 할 수 있고 뭔가 정말 과학적인 데이터 기반으로 정책이 가능한 그런 세상이 되는데 그런 기반이 좀 아직은 좀 우리가 약한 게 아닌가라는 생각이 듭니다. 그래서 어떤 형태로건 좀 뭐 우리가 국가 정책으로 비전도 만들고 다 목표를 세웠으니 디지털 트윈 대한민국을 만들어가는 그러려면 사실은 이제 데이터에 대한 생각이 좀 많이 달라져야 될 것 같아요. 이제 기계가 읽을 수 있는, 이해할 수 있는 그런 데이터. 우리가 학생들이 강남으로 가는 이유는 제가 볼 때 하나예요. 선생님도 훌륭하지만 거기 학습지가 좋아서 가는 거거든요. 마찬가지 AI가 정말 훌륭한 AI가 어디서 나올 거냐? 훌륭한 데이터가 있는 곳에서 훌륭한 AI가 나올 수밖에 없거든요. 근데 우리의 현실을 들여다보면 그런 AI가 공부할 수 있는 학습 데이터가 정말 잘 지금 체계적으로 생산이 되고 있느냐, 공유가 되고 있느냐, 그럴 때는 아니거든요. 그래서 이런 부분들을 좀 많이 풀어주셔야 되는 게 아닌가 싶고, 시뮬레이션 방법론, 뭐 여기 아까 이제 우리 교수님들이 뭐 스페이셜 익스플리시트 무슨 에이전 모델링도 있고 지오 AI도 있고 등등 한데 뭐 이제 그건 다 발전합니다. 어쨌건 이제 제일 중요한 거는 데이터다. 그래서 앞으로는 이제 그런 데이터가 어떻게 보면 미래 산업의 핵심 기반이고 우수한 인공지능을 만들 수 있는 기반이기 때문에 이걸 잘 준비하자. 저는 그게 오늘의 우리가 배운 것 중에 가장 중요한 부분이 아닌가 싶습니다. 할 얘기 많은데요. 저녁 시간에 하겠습니다.
네, 다른 질문하시고.
예, 제가 먼저 김대중 박사님의 질의에 대해서 답변차 말씀을 좀 드리겠습니다. 데이터 경제 시대로 접어들면서 데이터에 대한 중요성은 어느 때보다도 중요해진 것 같고요. 그 중에서도 위치에 관한 공간 정보가 차지하는 비중은 너무나도 중요한 것 같습니다. 모든 일은 어디선가 이루어지고 있고요. 어디서라는 그 위치 정보에 대한 게 이제 공간 정보라고 할 수 있는데, 이 공간 정보를 허브로 해서 모든 관련된 정보가 모이는 게 이제 현대 사회고 앞으로 발전된 사회의 모습이라고 할 수가 있겠습니다. 저희 국토부에서는 이러한 그 공간 정보의 중요성을 알고 공간 정보를 수집하고 그리고 관리하고 그리고 민간이나 공공에서 활용할 수 있도록 이렇게 이제 시스템을 구축해서 운영을 하고 있습니다. 그래서 모든 부처, 우리 부뿐만 아니라 뭐 행안부라든가 산자부라든가 해수부라든가 모든 부처에서 발생하는 공간 정보와 그리고 행정을 통해서 생산하고 있는 행정 정보 그리고 속성 정보 등을 모두 모아서 하나의 시스템으로 모아서 지금 활용을 하고 있습니다. 그걸 저희가 이제 KGO라는 명칭으로 부르고 있는데요. 한 2,200종 이상의 정보를 모아서 그 정보 중에서 공개가 가능한 정보가 있고요. 비공개하고 공개가 제한된 정보가 있습니다. 그래서 공개가 가능한 정보는 또 다른 오픈 플랫폼을 통해서 민간에 제공해서 민간에서 활용을 하고 있고요. 공개가 제한된 정보는 국가나 아니면은 지자체, 그 다음에 공공기관 등에서 활용할 수 있도록 이렇게 시스템을 구축을 하고 있습니다. 근데 현재 이 시스템에 대해서는 내외적으로 상당히 좀 문제점을 지적하는 사람들이 많이 있습니다. 그 문제점은 가장 중요한 것이 이제 정확한 정보를 수집을 해야 되는데 생산하고 수집을 해서 관리를 해야 되는데 그 정확성이 좀 떨어지지 않냐. 그래서 저희가 그 고정밀의 정확한 정보하고 그리고 2D 정보뿐만 아니라 3차원의 공간 정보를 만들어서 보관할 수 있도록 계속적으로 추가적인 예산을 확보를 해서 생산을 하고 있고요. 그리고 두 번째로는 이제 최신성입니다. 아무리 정확한 정보라도 오래된 정보는 그 값어치가 좀 줄어들기 마련인데요. 저희가 최신적인 정보를 확보하기 위해서 현재 1년의 그 데이터 갱신 주기로 운영을 하고 있는데 지금 한 달 정도로 좀 대폭 그 최신 데이터 갱신 주기를 좀 줄여서 좀 일반에 공개를 해서 활용할 수 있도록 할 예정입니다. 그 데이터를 수집하고 그리고 활용하는 데는 많은 어려움이 있습니다. 그 중에서는 데이터의 일반적인 속성에 의한 어려움도 있고요. 그리고 공간 정보의 특유한 어려움이 있습니다. 먼저 일반적인 데이터 상에서 그 수집하고 활용하는 데 어려움이라는 것은 이 데이터에는 상당한 그 개인 정보하고 민감 정보를 포함하고 있습니다. 그래서 한 예로는 코로나19 상황에서 우리나라에서는 그 확진자에 대한 동선을 추적해서 공개를 하는 정책을 좀 실시를 했었는데 그거에 대해서 상당한 논란이 있었고 그렇지만 확진자에 대해서는 코로나를 더 이상 확산을 방지하기 위해서는 그 확진자에 대한 동선은 꼭 관리를 해야 되겠다고 해서 관리한 측면이 있습니다. 이런 어려움 때문에 데이터를 생산하고 활용하는 데 좀 어려움이 있고요. 공간정보 측면에서 또 어려움이 있습니다. 우리나라 같은 경우는 다른 나라와 달리 남북이 좀 대치를 하고 있고 보안시설하고 군사시설이라는 아주 특이한 공개 제한 정보가 많이 있습니다. 그리고 비공개 정보도 많이 있고요. 그래서 공간 정보가 상당히 제한이 돼서 활용이 못 되는 측면이 있는데 이런 걸 좀 개선하기 위해서 저희가 이제 제도를 좀 개선을 해서 활용하는 제도가 있습니다. 그래서 기업에서 이러한 공개 제한 정보를 활용하고 싶은 기업이 있으면 이 기업들이 이 공간 정보, 공개 제한 공간 정보를 얼마나 안전하게 활용할 수 있는지를 평가를 해서 안전하게 활용할 수 있다고 평가가 된다면 저희가 공개가 제한된 정보를 기업에서 줘서 활용할 수 있는 제도를 작년부터 도입을 해서 활용을 하고 있고요. 금년부터는 따로 일정한 구역에 보안 구역을 마련을 해서 누구든지 거기 신청을 해서 공개 제한 정보를 그 보안 구역에서 분석을 하고 가공을 해서 필요하면 자기가 밖으로 반출을 해서 활용할 수 있도록 하는 제도를 지난주부터 지금 좀 도입을 해서 시행을 하고 있습니다. 좀 부족하지만 앞으로 계속해서 이 데이터를 정확한 데이터를 생산을 하고 그리고 최신의 정보를 수집하고 관리를 해서 민간에서 최대한 활용을 해서 우리의 그 산업을 발전시킬 수 있도록 이렇게 계속적으로 노력을 하겠습니다. 네, 이상입니다.
예, 전 전자신문 문보경 기자입니다. 앞에서 발표하신 분들 말씀 강연을 너무 잘 들었는데요. 사실 이제 세계 각국의 지금 시뮬레이션 기술들이 어떻게 발전이 되고 있고 이걸 접할 수 있는 저한테는 굉장히 좋은 기회여서 이 자리를 만들어주신 국토연구원에게 감사를 드립니다. 특히 이제 저한테는 강의들이 좀 굉장히 새로웠던 거는 그러니까 많은 대부분의 분들이 굉장히 저한테는 굉장히 다 새로운 것들이었지만 그 중에서 저기 싱가포르 사례가 아까 이제 아주 그 중에서도 이제 소음 관련해서 그러니까 이게 소음이 저는 공간 정보라고 생각을 해본 적이 없는데 이 공간 정보를 가지고 소음을 예측할 수 있는 그러니까 굉장히 우리가 살아가는 데 있어서 많은 정보들을 공간 정보를 통해서 이거를 수집하고 해결할 수 있는 방안을 찾아낼 수 있다는 게 굉장히 새로웠습니다. 그래서 이게 진짜 공간 정보가 우리 삶에 정말 생각하는 수준 이상으로 더 많은 영향을 끼칠 수 있겠구나라는 걸 느낄 수 있었고요. 그래서 지금 아마 이 패널 토론을 이렇게 한 거는 이런 기술들을 더 많이 개발해보자 이런 얘기뿐만이 아니라 이게 이제 이런 시뮬레이션 결과들이 우리 삶에 정말로 영향을 미치려면 정책에 이제 어떤 영향을 이렇게 미칠 수 있도록 정책 결정 과정에서 시뮬레이션이 많이 활용될 수 있는 사례가 됐으면 좋겠다라는 생각에서 아마 이 패널 토론을 만들려는 했을 것 같고요. 저도 이제 그걸 들으면서 왜 우리나라에서는 굉장히 많은 기술들이 발전을 하고 있고 디지털 트윈 같은 것도 사업들도 많고 굉장히 그런 연구 과제들도 많은데 사실 제가 이제 국토교통부를 출입하는 이제 5, 6년 동안 정책의 결정 과정은 거의 대부분 비슷했던 것 같아요. 그러니까 뭔가 이렇게 그 어떤 지역에서 무슨 문제가 있다라고 하면 분명히 이제 민원이 나오고 그거에 대한 기사가 나오고 그러면 이제 뭐 장관님이나 차관님이 주재해서 그 민원 얘기를 듣고 또 이제 전문가 주민들 간담회하고 전문가들 불러서 해결책을 좀 이렇게 찾아보고 그리고 이제 그게 이제 좀 너무 복잡할 것 같다라고 하면 이제 용역을 맡겨서 정책 연구를 하고 그렇게 해서 이제 발표를 하고 근데 그 정책을 발표하는 것도 대부분의 이제 어떤 사례가 있으면 그 사례에 대해서 특이한 부분만 이렇게 하는 것이 아니고 일반적으로 다 적용할 수 있는 뭐 이렇게 해서 정책 결정이 됐었던 것 같은데 그럴 때 그 사이에 이거를 만약에 이제 어떤 공간 정보나 그 이상의 것들을 활용해서 시뮬레이션을 해서 이런 걸 해봤다라는 걸 발표를 들어본 적이 저는 이제 정책 결정 과정에서 지금 한 5, 6년 동안 한 번도 없었던 것 같습니다. 근데 사실 이렇게 많은 기술들이 있다라는 얘기는 들었고 근데 정작 이렇게 정책에서는 이렇게 아직까지 활용이 안 돼 있고 또 국토부에서는 또 이걸 정책에 활용할 수 있도록 한 축에서는 또 R&D도 하고 있고 뭔가 좀 잘 안 맞는 것 같은데 그래서 그 국토정보정책관 쪽에서는 그러니까 물론 이제 전체 모든 지자체들이 어떤 뭐 건축 관련 업무를 하거나 뭐 이런 걸 할 때 활용할 수 있는 어떤 플랫폼을 개발하고 지원해주고 VR도 만들고 이런 것도 좋지만 그 국토부 내에 있는 예를 들어 주택이든 아니면 토지든 교통이나 이런 거에서 어떻게 공간 정보를 활용해서 시뮬레이션을 할 수 있는 그 개별 정책에서 이렇게 좀 공간 정보 전문가를 매칭을 해준다든가 이런 이제 정책에서 좀 진짜 반영이 될 수 있는 이런 것들을 좀 방안을 좀 찾아봐 주시면 어떨까라는 생각이 들었고요. 그런 그거하고 이제 맞물려서 내년에 이제 ICGIS 이렇게 하신다면은 이렇게 그 연구하시는 분들뿐만이 아니고 해외에서 이걸 가지고 실제로 정책을 이런 식으로 개선을 해봤습니다라는 걸 사례를 좀 발표해 줄 수 있는 그런 정부 관계자도 사실 또 연구 이렇게 그 논문 같은 거는 또 찾아보면 또 나오기도 하지만 그 정부에서 이렇게 하는 거는 또 정부 문서들이 굉장히 보안이 많이 걸려 있고 해서 알기가 쉽지가 않은 것 같아요. 그래서 그런 기회도 또 만들어 주시면 정말 좋겠다라는 생각이 들었습니다. 네, 그래서 또 하나는 또 말씀드릴 게 있었는데 잘 까먹고요. 어쨌든 이런 자리를 계속해서 이렇게 그 국토연구원에서 이렇게 연결해 주시고 해주셨으면 좋겠습니다. 네, 감사합니다.
네. 이어서 말씀드리도록 하겠습니다. 앞서 이제 세미나나 발표 너무나 잘 들었고 또 정말 힘든 문제 정의를 또 많은 데이터와 또 모델링은 지금 결과론적으로는 모델링을 몇 개를 해서 보여주셨지만 그 이면에는 수많은 시도 또 여러 가지 앙상블 모델로 해서 많은 연구 끝에 이런 좋은 결과가 나왔음을 저는 좀 알고 있었던 것 같고요. 너무 고생 많으신 결과를 제가 보게 돼가지고 저도 많이 배우게 된 것 같습니다. 제가 좀 말씀드리고 싶은 부분들은 과연 데이터가 중요한가라는 부분에서 말씀드리고 싶어요. 왜냐하면 저희는 이제 인공지능 팩토리라는 플랫폼은 검증 플랫폼입니다. 그래서 실제 R&D보다는 실제로 현업에서 사용하는 AI를 구동시키고 유지보수하고 현업에 적용하면서 그 기대 효과를 많이 중요시 여기는 그런 플랫폼인데요. 최근에는 이제 LLM 모델이나 파인 튜닝된 이런 모델들이 많이 나오고 있어서 데이터셋이 없다 하더라도 검증 체계에서 잘 검증된 우리가 원하는 매트릭만 통과하면 바로 사용할 수 있는 그런 AI 모델들이 현재 많이 나오고 있는 수준입니다. 그래서 예를 들어 뭐 미국에서 만들어진 모델이 한국에 적용했더니 정확도가 우리 원하는 정확도를 달성했다라고 하면 굳이 파인 튜닝 하지 않더라도 바로 사용할 수 있는 그런 체계를 우리는 구성해야 되는데 지금 많은 부분에서는 사실 그런 검증 체계가 없는 게 너무 많죠. 그래서 정말 훌륭한 모델이 있음에도 불구하고 사용 못하는 이유가 검증을 못해서 사용 못하는 이유가 너무 많습니다. 그래서 그런 측면에서는 학습용 데이터도 중요하지만 검증용 데이터가 더 중요하고 검증용 데이터라고 하면 우리가 매트릭 설계를 해야 되는데 오늘의 주제가 더 나은 삶을 위한 어떤 연구잖아요. 그러면 더 나은 삶에 대한 매트릭은 과연 무엇이냐? 그래서 그 매트릭을 지표로 설계하고 그 지표를 대면할 수 있는 데이터들을 모아서 그걸로 검증 체계를 먼저 만들고 이런 검증 체계를 지표로 세웠으니 각 연구자들 모여서 함께 데이터를 모아서 모델을 만드시다 하면 저는 충분히 만든 모델을 실제적으로 적용할 수 있는 그런 어떤 루프가 생성되지 않을까 그런 의견을 좀 제시하고 싶고요. 그리고 공간 데이터는 특히나 다른 데이터에 비해서 살아있는 데이터입니다. 과거 데이터로 학습한 모델로 지금 적용한다고 해서 제대로 안 되는 경우가 거의 태반일 거거든요. 그럼 우리는 이런 살아있는 데이터를 가지고 어떻게 평가할 거냐에 대한 고민들도 많이 해야 될 것 같고 이런 살아있는 데이터를 다루기 위해서는 현재 데이터를 모으는 것보다 실시간으로 데이터를 모아서 평가까지 이어갈 수 있는 그 디지털 트윈에 대한 실시간 평가 체계가 만들어져야 되는데 사실 우리는 AI 모델들을 지금 한 5년간, 6년간 수많은 AI 모델들이 만들어졌지만 실제 데이터로 평가를 하고 있는 모델은 정말 손꼽힐 것 같아요. 그래서 지금 우리는 정부나 또 학회, 산학연 다 모여서 현재 우리까지 지금 만드는 AI 모델도 현재 체계에서 평가할 수 있는 그런 체계를 만든다면 그 중에 10%라도 제대로 적용된다면 정말 디지털 강국이 될 거라는 생각이 듭니다. 마지막으로 AI 가지고 정책 결정하는 데 있어서 제가 다른 사례를 보면 좀 웃긴 게 하나 있었습니다. 농산물 가격 예측하는 모델인데요. 농산물 가격 예측을 정말 잘하는 모델이 생겼는데 그것 때문에 농산물 가격 예측 자체가 안 되기 시작했어요. 왜냐하면 다들 그 농산물 가격 예측을 보고 비싸면 안 사고 싸면 사다 보니까 오히려 그게 모델링에 더 안 좋은 결과를 이렇게 보게 되더라고요. 그런 걸 좀 생각해 보면 사실 우리는 AI의 정확도를 높은 AI를 만드는 게 목표가 아니라 더 나은 삶을 만들기 위한 목표라고 한다면 우리는 지금까지 과거 데이터로 학습한 걸 모델링을 통해서 과연 어떤 피처가 중요한가에 대한 인사이트를 얻고 그 인사이트를 다음 제너레이션이나 아니면 그 다음 어떤 섹터에 우리가 적용할 때 정책을 적용하는 그런 루프를 형성하면 좋지 않을까 싶습니다.
제가 간단하게 잠깐만 하나만. 제가 이게 토론 방식에 익숙하지가 않아서 처음에 틸 교수님께 질문을 드리고 그다음에 제 의견을 말하려고 그랬는데 한국말로 해도 되는지 아니면 영어로 해야 되는지 혼동이 돼서요. 공간 정보에 AI를 도입하는 것이 마치 뭐 cure all 만병통치약처럼 그렇게 작동할 수 있는가에 대해서는 저는 조금 회의적이에요. 스캡티컬한 이유가 무엇이냐면 아까 말씀하셨다시피 데이터 문제가 가장 큰 것 같아요. 그러니까 우리가 이런 AI들은 대부분 어떤 실험실에서의 실험이라든지 그런 쪽에서 많이 들었는데 그것과는 다르게 도시 문제에서 어떤 예측한다든지 분석하는 것은 전혀 다른 문제인 것 같습니다. 많은 사람들은 좀 더 많은 변수와 좀 더 복합적인 문제를 풀기 위해서 AI를 쓰는데 사실은 그러면 그럴수록 예측력은 떨어지고 조금 오차의 범위는 늘어날 수밖에 없다는 것이죠. 그래서 AI를 사용하려면 도시 문제에서 AI를 사용하려면 굉장히 리미티드된 도메인에서 사용해야 된다라고 생각이 들어요. 예를 들어서 아까 지금 정 박사님은 가셨지만은 도시의 어떤 그 노선 문제를 해결하기 위해서는 AI의 뭐 LSTM이라든지 여러 가지 그 AI 방법론이 사용될 수도 있지만은 그보다는 트래디셔널한 그런 어떤 좋은 모델들도 굉장히 많았거든요. 그런 모델들을 같이 푸는 것이 좋을 것 같고 아까 그 꼬안 박사님도 말씀하셨다시피 에너지 컨섬션만 고려해서 도시 디자인을 자동화하는 AI 굉장히 아주 멋진 연구시지만은 그럼에도 불구하고 보다 복합적인 문제가 개입되기 시작하면은 예를 들면은 도시의 접근성 문제, 또 시설 사용 문제, 복합적인 문제가 끼어들면 끼어들수록 문제는 해결하기 어려워진다는 것이죠. 많은 분들이 그렇게 어그리를 하실 거라고 믿지만은 AI를 이용해서 도시 문제를 해결하기 위해서는 도메인을 리미티드하게 만들고 변수를 심플하게 만들고 그리고 기존의 방법론을 같이 쓰면은 좀 더 좋지 않을까 그렇게 생각이 듭니다.
네, 지금 방금 그 의견에 많이 공감을 하는데요. 그래서 지금 우리가 많은 데이터로 모아서 모델링하고 시뮬레이션하는 이유 중 하나가 말씀하신 것처럼 뭘 제약적으로 만들고 어떤 피처만 사용해서 실제 모델링에 도움을 받는가 거기에 좀 포커스를 가지기 위한 연구를 좀 한다라고 좀 보시면 될 것 같고 아까 잠깐 말씀드렸던 농산물 예측 관련해서 많은 데이터를 모아서 해봤더니 결국 중요한 게 음력이더라. 이게 나왔었어요. 그래서 우리는 한국은 음력에 추석이 있고 이렇게 다 음력으로 돌아가잖아요. 그래서 그전에는 이걸 못 봤었어요. 다 모아봤더니 그게 나중에 깨닫게 돼가지고 음력 하나만 넣었더니 정확도가 엄청 높아지는 거예요. 네, 그런 것처럼 말씀처럼 리미티드인데 주요 피치만 모아서 실제 적용하는 거랑 R&D는 좀 다르다. 네, 근데 공감이 됩니다.
Dr. Quan, do you want to add any comment or question to my comment? It's okay. Okay. I was impressed with your wonderful presentation before. Actually, I'm sorry, we are a little behind the schedule.
정리할까요? 그러면 끝낼까요? 예, 알겠습니다. I believe we had a productive and inspiring time together with the distinguished guests and participants, and this event is about to come to the very end. I hope you have found the presentations at this conference informative and helpful. Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, see you at 2024 ICGIS next year. Thank you.